Hello, everyone. Well, there are some. I have to wait on Dana to enter here. But I am live. So I apologize. It will be a bit later. So Dana can anytime drop in. So I apologize for a bit of delay, but he is trying to come into the app and somehow, yeah, it is what it is. Hey, Jos, everything was prepared so well. Hello, Alice. I will show myself. Hi, you all. Waiting for data. Yeah, that can happen, of course. Apparently, with the restream, something is not, yeah, working. Oh, now okay. I changed something now, which I should not have done. So welcome, everyone. Hello, Sputniki. Welcome. Yeah, it is. I don't know. It is. He is not capable of entering in the restream, and I try to make it work. So we're a bit delayed, but it will work out. Let's send all positive vibes. And so I will go, offline, or not offline, but you will see the trailer, and I will go. Check on you all in a few minutes and trying to solve this. Hello, Anja. And meanwhile, also greet you all in the chat. And if I'm right, then I'm also live on Trovo and even on Odyssey. That's a while ago. Welcome on Odyssey and on Rumble. Yeah, also on Rumble. Everything you can see now how that goes. Everything works accordingly when I rehearsed. And now the evening is still young, yeah, and I have the time, so I don't know why. This it's a bit delayed, but yeah, it's also a good thing because now everyone, maybe because of the nice sunny day here in the Netherlands, is later coming back from sitting in the garden or in the sun. So we start later, and I apologize, but that happens. So, how are you all doing? Hello, Sunbeam Sting. Hello, everyone. So, I'm communicating with Dana, so that's why you see me busy and you hear my keyboard. Yeah, it is the way it is. That is what happens in the live streaming world, and I do everything, from one computer here. Ah, you just had your dinner. Well, okay. And by the way, for questions, hello, Dana. Yeah, it worked. Hello. How are you doing? Yeah, I'm totally fine. Yeah, you too, and uh, it is a bit. It could be a bit lower, I guess. It's a bit disforming. And welcome. And can you maybe your camera drop a bit, or is it the best way? Ah, Ah, that's even better. Yeah. Well, well, yes. Yes, I can hear. I can hear you very well. You see me as well? Yeah, well, welcome, so much welcome again. Yeah, we had a bit issues with coming into the restream, but yeah, that happens with live streaming. Ah, okay. By the way, now I hear that Dana is not audible. He should be
Okay.
audible. And now, everyone?
Mic check 1, 2, 3, 4.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes.
So we
Yes.
got that one? Okay, good. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And your mic is a bit disformed still. So
Is that right?
it's a bit
It's very rough, eh? It doesn't sound, even if I get closer, it's
it
just,
even I can have a hard time hearing you, and that's very important, of course.
okay, mic check 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's still a
Is that,
bit misformed. Maybe I should put it a bit lower. Let me see.
I'm not sure what's going on.
Now it's even more bad. Maybe do it the way it was.
I had it up, so up, there's 2,
Yeah,
right?
that's better.
That's better?
Yeah, that's better. Isn't it, chat? Loud and clear. Wow, loud, Sunbeamsting. So I will ask the chat.
I'll turn it down a little tiny bit more. You can just keep telling me. How's that?
This is it's
Do you want me to go back up or down?
yeah, it's disformed still a bit. So
And if I turn it up, it's worse.
lower a bit is in the chat. Say
I'm
something
trying to
then.
figure out where the lag is between us and the sound showing up. I guess it's not much.
I don't hear you. I even have my ears in and I cannot understand you. I'm so sorry. And
I can change. Hang on. Testing 1, 2. Is that one coming in any better?
again, say something.
Mic check 1, 2. Nothing.
It is a bit better.
I got 4 channels, but that channel. This was the channel we were using the last time.
Yeah, the last time was okay. And I hear also in the chat, some say you're very well, but I also did something with my audio here, with the audio in the stream. So maybe now it's better. I'm curious.
Yeah, and so I just changed it again. I'm sorry.
This is great, by the way. This is great.
This is fine?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
We'll
Dana,
leave it there.
again.
Don't touch nothing.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I'm really very honored that you took the time to come back for a second time here.
Oh, I'm honored to be back. Thank you so kind.
Yeah, because
And hopefully we can share screens this time.
yes, and to explain to everyone, we had everything. I did a dry run. If I don't know if that's the right expression. This morning, I tested everything out, and now we are a bit delayed because with your entering in Restream. But how you can share is, do you see share screen underneath?
I do.
And then you can just click that one, and you see also all these like this. So if you want to share something, you can do this, or you can do this, or this. And then you can also put me aside. So if you know what I mean.
I'm not sure. So I'm not sure. Selects window or screen, the entire screen. So if I send you my entire screen, because I got a bunch of folders ready to go. So are you looking at reactor building right now?
Yes, I can make it visible. So now you see the reactor building. You see? This is
and
yeah.
I wanted to come in on that screen.
Yes.
And so how do I get in there? I wonder.
It is
Okay.
now visible, by the way.
Am I in the screen too?
Yes, on the right side, it changes on its own. So that's great. It works
Oh,
great.
okay. And so this is where we're going to start. What I got planned for everybody, if that's okay with you, was to sh- uh, run through a whole bunch of information that you're familiar with, but I picked out for your audience
Yes.
because I'm going to assume they don't know nothing, and so I'm going to run them right through the gauntlet of the story, which normally is very complicated to work out on your own, but everybody watches this is certainly going to be extremely educated on this topic by the time we get through it.
Mm-hmm.
And the important facets of it, because I mean, there's around 9,000 facets to this story,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
it's
so
mm-hmm.
I'm going to come back into the regular screen for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So now I got me and you on the screen. Is that what you're
Yes.
getting on your end?
Yes,
Okay.
it's
Well,
perfect. It works
so
perfect.
when are we ready to
Well,
get in gear?
maybe it's for the people who don't know you yet. Maybe you like to introduce yourself a bit.
That's a pretty good way to start. So are we ready to go? That's the question I had.
Oh, that's well. First of all,
Are you
maybe
syndicated right now? Are you gone out to 7 sites and
yeah,
are we rocking?
yeah. We're rocking already. You're already live. I forgot to mention it,
Okay, great
but
stuff.
that's fine. I
Well, that
mean,
helps.
the people know, and they also a
So
lot of people greet you as well, also from the
thank you. Hi,
first time,
everybody.
and so
Hugs for everybody. Hope you're all doing well.
yeah,
I'm Dana Durnford. Monique, I'll save Monique the
yes,
repeating of that. So just so everybody knows who I am, I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclear proctologist.org. I'm going to try to slow down my English for a lot of people.
great,
And so the nuclear proctologist.org, I inspect the nuclear industries. I inspect the basic way of looking at it is I inspect their narratives and see if there's any indiscretions. And so that's um, it's a full-time job with this industry in particular. This is probably the strangest story you'll ever hear is the nuclear industry. And if you're into obviously what Monique, the MK Ultra, then this will fit right into your bigger picture. This really helps comprehend how deep this thing actually goes in every facet of everybody's lives.
mm-hmm.
And I do research expeditions. So I go out and do species counts, insects, birds, mammals, animals, and I'm looking for damage from radioactive fallout. It'll show up in invertebrates without backbones like shrimp and stuff like that in freshwater, saltwater. There's many species in the ocean extremely vulnerable, so snails and mollusks, mussels and clams, oysters, um, shellfish in particular are filter feeders. So when they're filtering radioactive water, they're going to bioaccumulate the radiation about 125,000 times more than a fish does. And a fish is really good at bioaccumulating anthropogenic man-made radiation. So this is a toxin we're talking about. It is considered 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison in the same quantities.
Mm-hmm.
So you only need a very, very insignificant amount to cause you serious harm long term. And what I mean by that is, say you get a single atom. Now, put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. And so, if you can get a single atom in your body from man made stuff, from nuclear fallout, nuclear dumping, nuclear explosions, etc., etc., so all this is applicable to all species. Your body attacks the atom for the rest of your life because it's pulsing energy at the speed of light every second and almost 286,000 miles per second. It pulses this energy in every direction. That wrecks cells and chromosomes and DNA, and it also wrecks your organs, causes lesions in adult organs in very small amounts over a period of time. And so your body has to attack every single atom for the rest of your life with white blood cells. That displaces your white blood cells each time you're doing that, and that's permanent. So they're always producing white blood cells to repair the damage from the pulsing of the radiation every second that is in your body, or animals or insects or birds or anything else. and it attacks everything with replicating cells. And we don't have an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. And so there's around 1,800 diseases. It's not going to be just cancer. So there's heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. They'll do studies after accidents in communities and look for discrepancies of these types of diseases because they're expecting them to show up. And we'll move right along here. So after Chernobyl, most people think Chernobyl is a 30-kilometer exclusion zone. It was actually closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom, and over 400 are still closed today because of radioactive fallout. They closed the freshwater fishery in Switzerland for 30 years, and the commercial fishery because of Chernobyl radioactive fallout.
Did I hear you well? For 30 years?
For 30 years,
Yeah.
3 decades. And after Fukushima, a few years later, just decided to hell with it. We got so much radiation in the environment, it doesn't matter anymore. And so they removed those particular restrictions. Okay, and so how they studied that was they looked at Europe and done sex ratio studies on males and females discrepancies. And they do this after all accidents, large accidents that affect a large area for radiation. And so they know that there's going to be more males being born than females. And this is going to be true in the animal kingdom and everything else, remember. The insects, the birds, and every other species, not just going to be a human when you talk about this kind of stuff. And so what they discovered was more males being born than females. That meant everybody had to get radiated, which meant that you're susceptible to around 1,800 diseases also. But that was one way of quantifying that the entire population was poisoned. And so then their reply now is to say there was an injury to Europe. They describe it as an injury or an insult to the species, for instance. And what that is just a catastrophic disease to all the species uniformly are going to be affected by it. And so one way to look at that was after Japan's nuclear meltdowns in 2011, obesity rates increased by 50% in the first year. And there was 865,000 extra cancers by 2012. So not everybody got health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. And I'll keep reminding you and keep enforcing a lot of these pertinent points, like there's 1,800 diseases. So when there's a nuclear accident, you should be studying long term. You want to study dementia and autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. Down syndrome is usually the first one that shows up 9 months later in babies that are being born, conceived after the meltdown. You'll look for a discrepancy in more, and we see that, more babies with Down syndrome, and you know how debilitating and heart gut-wrenching those types of insults and injuries are to them. Now, this is going to be true for animal kingdom, but they don't have healthcare, so we don't see these deformities. They don't survive. The predators will snatch them up, right? But remember, we had a major pulse. We have 80 years of radioactive fallout going on our planet, so everybody's sick from radiation. And we have a major pulse in 2011 from multiple reactors. This is something we've never heard tell of. And if it's okay with Monique, I'm going to go to the pictures unless you want to throw something out there. I'll go through the first set of pictures when you're ready.
Well, great. Yeah, I see in the chat again a lot of people say hello to you. So
hi, everybody.
And I forgot to mention that, for example, questions for everyone who has questions.
Yes.
It would be, I think, better more because I think also for me, I like to concentrate on what you say. I'm very honest. I really want to focus on what you say and really
Thank you.
suck in your words.
and you got a lot to get through. Yeah, we got a few hours. Yeah, that'll go pretty quick, actually.
That
goes really quick, right?
Yeah, and it is a lot of information. I can imagine as well.
Yeah.
But I wanted
it's a keeper. Yeah, you're not going to find it anywhere else. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Monique.
Thank you. And for all the questions that you put them in the chat with a Q, and then it will all sorted out in a break, because I forgot to mention, I think it's also great to have a kind of a break. Approximately, what is for you a nice time to have a break? A little break. Or are you used to go on?
I got a tendency. Well, I do 5 shows a week that are 2 hours.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So
and I don't have a guest because they get in my way, and so.
yeah.
Well, because you only got 2 hours, and 2 hours.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that, for anybody who's not familiar, is I'm going to cover the 24-hour nuclear news cycle, and I'm going to show you for that 24-hour news cycle. It's going to take me 2 hours to show you a fraction of the lies, and the documentation to support those assertions is going to take me at least 2 hours. So I'm just going to cherry pick the top stories.
Exactly.
That'll still take me 2 hours
to
flush out the deceit and dishonesty.
It is incredible, but
it's
also
incredible. Yeah,
it is amazing, and for me, so many things have come together in a lot of things. But it's not to talk about me, but I came across nuclear energy already much earlier than 2011. But as soon as I heard about Fukushima, I was immediately alarmed, and I started to follow someone from Japan who made a diary, and I saw all these bags being filled, but maybe you will talk about that as well, with these 30 million bags and so on. So I saw the disformity already very early via this online diary. So, but let's see when we take a break, because I want to give you all the space to talk, and I will not interrupt. And just you do your presentation. If you want to show some documentation, go ahead. And we have at least till 10:30, and even I have now for this evening even longer time. And maybe it's good mention that people have questions, and I have already some questions already ready, so that we take time for questions. So
I would like to answer every single question if possible. Yeah.
Well, then we just say you do your presentation, and maybe I will jump in to ask something, but I won't interrupt you too often because you are the guest. And then let's see when we take a break.
If necessary, you feel free to jump in.
And then I was thinking maybe start from 9:30 or between 9:30 the questions, that we have at least 45 minutes for the questions. Is that an idea?
Yeah? I think so. Yeah.
All right. Well, then we have a bit of a setup. Okay, so go ahead. Continue.
Okay, so I'm going to go share screen again, I guess. Select another screen.
You just...
and screen, allow... And away we go, I think. And so, just to double check, in a second, you should see a picture of one of the reactors. Do you see a picture of the reactor, Monique?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so here we go, folks. Okay, what I'm going to do is, let's try to slow down a little bit, but I'm going to run through all the reactor buildings, and I'm going to give you a quick explanation of each building. And I'm going to compare it to Chernobyl to give you some context.
Yes, very clear.
Okay, here we go. So Chernobyl, first off, and you're not looking at Chernobyl, you're looking at the number 1 reactor in Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan that suffered multiple reactor meltdowns and 8 fuel pools, and I'll explain them to you coming up. So Chernobyl was a graphite reactor, and Chernobyl was a brand new reactor. And Chernobyl didn't have what's known as fuel pools, where they store decades of reactor cores in these pools. There's 2 reactor fuel pools at the top of each of these boiling water reactor buildings. These are high pressure reactors over 1,000 psi. And Chernobyl only had a reactor core that was graphite. And that's really bad. And don't get me wrong, Chernobyl was brutal. But Fukushima's reactors were pure uranium, pure plutonium, and this makes them hundreds of times worse per reactor. So Chernobyl, of course, there's incredible amount of orphanages and hospitals dedicated to taking care of deformed children, disfigured children that are abandoned by their loved ones. And it's a very, very sad situation. They suffer from debilitating Down syndrome and disfigurement and stuff like this. And there's no healthcare system to take care of them. So a lot of these places don't even have a television set. And they're basically thrown away in the dark. And foundations around the world, some from Britain in particular, have been alleviating some of that misery. But I mean, it's daunting. There's so many disfigurements from Chernobyl. So now I'm going to run through the most important story of history, this biggest nuclear event in human history, that actually the fallout dwarfs all the nuclear weapons that we've done, and we've done a lot. And I'll touch on that coming up. Here we go. So what you're looking at now is Building 1. Building 1, it started off with this detonation at the top of it. Now up here was the fuel pool. And there was a fire, multiple fires in this building. This building was gone down into the earth. There was 2 fuel pools at the top of the building that had decades of reactor cores, unlike Chernobyl. And these reactors, by the way, are much bigger than Chernobyl and much more fuel. So when they melted down, it started off with a detonation. And I'll show you a picture of the detonation coming up. The buildings, each of these buildings are 190 feet tall. They're 19-story buildings and 150 feet wide. And this was the detonation. So the little squares you're looking at are actually 190 feet tall and 150 feet wide. Reactor 1 was right by these tall stacks. These 2 tall stacks you see there are where they vent the fuel pools. The fuel pools are always hemorrhaging into the environment, and we'll talk about that maybe a bit later. But most nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms, and that's how they get rid of background radiation, is they ship the food to the supermarkets, the contaminated food. The fuel pools are, the reactor cores are in the fuel pools for decades because they're still splitting atoms. That ends up going up those stacks as evaporated water. About 120,000 liters per fuel pool each day. There's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. So these detonations, these pictures were taken by cameras about 30 miles away, security cameras, and then so you're not going to get the best pictures, but we do have the videos of them detonating. And so this was a pulse. It basically atomized an aerosol the fuel particulates in the reactor cores of the store. Now, to give you context of how big these buildings actually are, this is a contraption they built off-site, and I'll explain that to you. So you can kind of see this is a very big, very, very big piece of equipment, right? Now, the building is going to go all the way up, or that contraption, which is going to be a Kevlar sarcophagus, and you can see it there, is being laid with these panels. Just nobody can go near that. That's a lethal dose. It was up to 1 million sieverts originally outside this building. 3 sieverts is considered a lethal dose in a short period. If you run past 10 sieverts, you're going to die that day. 3 sieverts, you'll die within the next couple of weeks. Your organs will start to melt. So each of these panels are in there by gravity. They constructed this off-site, brought it in, assembled it with remote control cranes. And this was to direct the emissions. They kept it on it for 5 years. And if you took a 1 foot panel off of this and took it to your local subway, everybody who walked past it would die that day. That's how radioactive. Go ahead.
Sorry, I am allowed to interrupt once, but for many people, I guess, in the Netherlands, might not know what a mile approximately is of kilometers and feet in meters. Do you happen to know that? And the height is then, if I recall, 16 to 70 apartments on top of it.
So 19 apartments high.
Yeah.
That will help.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and similar wide. So if you had a 19-story building, it would be what you would expect for a 19-story building wide, which is 150 feet, but you want to multiply that by 3, I guess, to get meters.
Mm-hmm.
Or, yeah. I'm sorry, no, divide it by 3. Divide it by 3 to get meters, right? So meters is dividing it by 3. Multiply 3 gives you feet, basically. So 1 meter is 3 feet. So I'll try to remember to do it. For those who are catching this part of the stream, hopefully that'll help them.
Well, if it doesn't distract you too much, but it's in the chat already also put down, so it's
try metric a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try to include both of them if possible.
Yeah.
So these are these are 19-story buildings, basically. Is the best way to explain it for everybody, I think. So they put this Kevlar sarcophagus around and walked away from it. Now, this is also vented up the tall stacks you saw. Those stacks are lethal doses to walk past them. We got some of that coming up after. So there's nobody can survive at a nuclear meltdown. The next building was Reactor 2. Reactor 2 was the only building, and these are all similar, exact replicas of each other. Reactor 2 went what we know as China syndrome. Up in the top right-hand corner, you can see the heat signature of the entire building is red hot. And that caught fire and burnt continuously for several days. This has decades of reactor cores and 2 fuel pools at the top of the building and an active running reactor core, the same as Reactor 1 building did at the time. These were running reactors, these two, and the next one. And so this one went down into the earth. And what happened, it hit the water table, water evaporates or expands. A liter will expand around 1,800 feet in a millisecond. And so this split the earth in multiple places for long distances. And the radioactive steam coming out of the earth in 6 places was enough that they had to abandon the site many, many times. This is lethal doses at all measurement spots on the site of over 10 sieverts per hour in the steam. Now, accumulating, when you're talking about all the steam, you can't survive anywhere near the site, from gamma rays, neutron bombardments, X-rays, and beta rays. These are very powerful pulses that will melt the human's organs, and so you can't survive. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and this is very descriptive for anybody with sensitive ears, it's a very difficult story for people with sensitive ears. After Nagasaki, Hiroshima, one of the things they seen repeated itself in the dead victims was they had squatted down and excreted their organs because they had melted, and that's where they either died and fell over right there or made it a few more feet. And this was a phenomenon. Now, they also took several thousand Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims and shipped them to Los Alamos National Laboratory, United States, and incinerated them, because you can't destroy radiation by incinerating it. They incinerated what they call ashing. They ashed the victims and sniffed the air for different isotopes. It's a very cruel industry when you think about it. So Reactor 2 was 100% lost. Each of these are significantly considered about 100 Chernobyl cores gone. So that's 200 Chernobyl cores, but that still doesn't do it justice. And because when they melt down, and they consume steel and rebar at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, they're consuming everything around it. They're atomizing and aerosoling, ionizing and radiating, and that is contributing to the radioactive fallout and particulates. And so when you radiate lead or iron or cement and everything else, there's a lot of these have a very short half-life of, say, 2 or 3 years. And these are very, very powerful emissions. So the fallout is very dangerous. Now, the fallout, radioactive emissions, you got gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas, and they pulse at the speed of light every second. So when they hit each other, even on angles, they change direction. They don't actually mingle. This is super important, the understanding the harm. And so when they come in, they don't mingle with each other. They change direction. That's known as a braking, a Bremsung effect in Germany language. I think I probably butchered it. But it's known as a braking effect, like you brake your car. So you got speed of light, braking effect, they change direction. That's known as X-rays. And so when you have all this radioactive fallout, you have all these full body X-rays happening in your forest to all your species. And so all the insects and spiders and animals and mammals and birds and nesting birds, and especially during spring, of course, you're sterilizing them in increments, a lot of them in increments over a decade, and then they finally don't reproduce anymore. Because this stuff is not going to go away long past the human experience. This will be here for millions of years, a lot of it. And there's a fable out there that the longevity radioactive isotopes don't have, energy. Well, that's only true in nature. That's not true for man-made anthropogenic radiation. This is why plutonium was named after the devil, because it has a 240,000 year lifespan. There's 10 half-lives to 24,000 years. And it's still as energetic in 240,000 years as it was yesterday. So, right. And so they like to try to confuse you, and they're very good at it. And they've been telling the same lie for 80 years. So it's very effective. And you don't really hear, because you hear like of cancer your whole life when it comes to radiation, but they've neglected to mention there's 1,800 diseases and illnesses and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries from radioactive inhalation, for instance, or consuming it or drinking it or washing your clothing or getting showers in it. And that female species are infinitely more vulnerable to the radiation than the male species. Not that they're not vulnerable, but they're at least 4 to 5 times more vulnerable. And so that's a big problem if you want to have a population, because when you start neutralizing the female, then you can't reproduce the species or humanity no more. And so the most important thing we are going to end up thinking about long term, to those that are sincere, is how do we protect the female population of the planet of all species? That's unbelievably pertinent when it comes to radiation. It's a pretty dirty trick that they've done to us. So to your left is what's known, what I call the stump, the ghost of reactor 4 building. And you can see there's literally nothing left in the building. You couldn't find a light switch or a desk or a chair or a cabinet. And what you're looking at up here is the elevator shaft. Now the building, this is the reactor core. This is the dome for the reactor core, and this is the bottom of it. They had half the reactor core were in this, because when they were changing the fuel in reactor 4, they only changed at best a half of it. That would be exceptional to change half the fuel at one time. So the other half was actually still in the reactor core. The fuel pools were about 120 feet above this wreckage, and this is a lethal dose. No matter where you try to stand up, you will die. And what was interesting was what you're seeing is a fraction of the media, and I put these pictures together to help articulate how bizarre this story actually is. We have the entire planet's media, and I'm giving you 4 as an example. ABC. Cecilia Vega, by the way, is now in the press club of the White House. CNN, Anna Curran. She's a BBC, Rupert Winfield Hayes. These are incredibly iconic journalists. CBS, Seth Dorn. He's a senator's son. They're pretending they're 120 feet above the stump of reactor 4 in a fuel pool, getting the fuel out of the pool. Now, the entire world media went out and perpetrated that particular lie. So if everybody's telling the same lie, then it must be true, kind of. But when you look at the 2 buildings, these are both the official pictures. So why would the whole world's media go through such an extent to hide a lousy couple of buildings? Because of the adverse side effects from the radioactive fallout. So you had 4 reactors in a row melt down, and they had 8 fuel pools at the top of the buildings. They're all gone too. So Chernobyl was about 1/100th of the uranium plutonium of a single reactor, but they never had no fuel pools, which drives the ante up. So this was a pulse, and I'll show you the fallout coming up in a bit. This is shortly after of reactor 3. Reactor 3 was the mixed oxide fuel, and the mixed oxide fuel is where they took uranium plutonium from reactors that have already gone through a cycle. And so once it goes through a cycle, it's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And it's still splitting the atoms for a long time. And so when you put it through a chain reaction again, it's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So these are all super hot particles. There was a huge inventory of it. The biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods in all the buildings would have been curium. You need lead shielding 20 times thicker for curium than you do for plutonium. And of course, plutonium is named after the devil because of his toxicity. Mm-hmm. Reactor 3 to your left, that's the official picture, and to your right is the official picture, where they're claiming they're at the top of the building looking down on the fuel pool when the building actually doesn't exist. So it wasn't just reactor 4 that they done that stunt to. They also done the same thing to reactor 3. I think this is absurd, and this is how they done it. They built this contraption off-site. They laid it on top of the building, then did a large public campaign. I haunted them for 6 days straight during the propaganda campaign. And I took all of their stories and came out with a rebuttal in the form of 2-hour presentations for 6 days straight. When you look at the building underneath it, though, you start realizing there's something wrong with this picture. These frames are put there to stop the wall from caving in. These contraptions, by the way, don't touch the physical building. And because obviously the building is not stable, you can't, build something on something like that. So this was about show and tell. So they went. Now they never physically went in there. They put that there as to claim they got the fuel in 2 years ago out of the pool that would have been up here. It's the whole story is crazy, but this is what they done. This is the same building. There is nothing left to the building. And again, this was the most toxic building of the 4 reactors. Sorry. I lost track here. Here we go. So media representative walk on top of number 3 reactor building. Now, when you really scrutinize these videos and pictures, you won't see anything in the background. Everything is whited out. You won't actually see anything there that says we're at Fukushima. So they built this off-site, and they do this for a lot of accidents in nuclear. They'll build a mock-up, and then they'll have the crews go in and practice with the mock-up, and then they'll go to the real deal and try to do the job. Now, in this case, you got people in paper suits, and paper suits can't protect you at a nuclear meltdown. You can't survive, even if this was 4 feet thick lead under your feet. You couldn't survive. You're surrounded by multiple reactor meltdowns on top of it. So the fuel pools we're talking about, I probably should have showed you earlier, are those 2 depictions at the top. The reactor core is also at the top. The reactor core is taken out underwater and put into the fuel pools for storage. The fuel pools are humanity's worst enemy because they're still splitting atoms, and they boil off 120,000 liters a day in each pool. And that's released into the environment in the form of steam, and that liberates, per liter, we're assuming trillions of anthropogenic man-made isotopes per liter each day. So these things, even without a meltdown, would be a problem to the survival of the species. And I accidentally went off my page. I'm going to bring that. I guess we can get that back up.
It doesn't matter.
I closed it, did I? Okay. So we got to go back to that one. It'll take me a second. And that was right here. And that was the first one we showed right there. Okay, so the fuel pools are at the top of the building. That's reactor 3. That's unit 1 again, explosion. Remember, the buildings are 19-story buildings. And it's going to force me to go through everything. I'm using the Windows 11, and that kind of gives me a problem. I noticed when I'm doing these PowerPoint presentations. So there's a pretty good way of looking at the building. Think about 50 meters or 60 meters, 65 meter tall building, 190 foot tall building. Then does that look to you like it's 165 meters or 190 feet tall building? Of course not. Now, the trucks that are there are supposed to be putting water in the fuel pool. This is symbiotic in order to get pictures to confuse and manipulate the population into believe in that particular fairy tale. And again, this is a really great picture. This is supposed to be a 19-story building. The fuel pools and the reactor cores were at the top of this building. So they're obviously gone, but officially they got the fuel out of the pool and soon they're going to get it out of the reactors. Neither one actually exists. So why is the world media willing to go through such an incredible deception? And whenever you see these paper suits, TEPCO actually put out a story where they said they burnt 7,000 of these suits each day. But the reality of it is that, and anybody in the industry can confirm it for you, is that the paper suits need to be 4 feet thick. They can't protect you from radiation. The reactors are not made of paper; they're made of absurd amount of shielding. And so, no nuclear scientists have visited the site, and that's evident by the paper suits in many ways. See? That's reactor three. Again, the hoax of reactor three, because that's what it actually looks like underneath it. Now, around the building, I don't know if I got any distance shots. The small buildings around it, you won't see the debris cleaned off the roof of it. Again, I'm just trying to overdo it for you so you can really appreciate, because you only get this one opportunity maybe to really see the big picture of. So doomsday, we'll go to reactor 4. It's the last one we're going to talk about. Doomsday, like radiation release of fire in the pool at unit 4. It would be a global catastrophe if that happened. And guess what happened? That's reactor 4 to your right. And so here's the media alluding that it would be a global catastrophe. Well, it's gone. It is a global catastrophe, as you'll see coming up. So you got reactor 3 and 4 in particular, very, very easy to understand that the fuel pools and the reactor cores don't exist. It's a little harder for 1 and 2, but again, we have so much documentation, it's unassailable, it's incontestable. Former Fukushima worker, I believe the country will be evacuated if the number 4 fuel pool collapsed. It should be hundreds of thousands of people working furiously every day. So this fable, think about that. The country should be evacuated if this building fuel pool that don't exist no more collapse. And should be evacuated because of radioactive fallout, and we'll show you that stuff coming up right away. Let's just run backwards now to I meant to show you that first. Fukushima had the major earthquake, a major tsunami. Tsunami inundated around 1,300 miles of the coastline, where people were actually killed by the tsunami. Mm-hmm. So that took out all the telephone poles, all the infrastructures. It made travel impossible for help. Now, the red numbers you're seeing are people that actually died from the tsunami, and the yellow numbers are people that are missing from the tsunami. Fukushima, unfortunately, was right in the middle of the coastline, and the earthquake happened right off the coastline itself. And to your left, you can see an overlay to your right of where people died and where the reactors are in that section. I'll give you more context by doing that for sure. So you had multiple meltdowns that I explained them to you, and detonates. All the buildings detonated. We have the heat signature. There's nothing left. In the bottom one, left-hand corner is reactor 4. Bottom right-hand corner is reactor 3. They're completely gone. Reactor 1 and reactor 2 was hot. Reactor 1 lost its fuel pool through the detonations. I forgot I got a mouse there. There we go. Make life a bit easier.
You have so much to show.
Okay, so reactor, this is immediately after the first month or so after. And you can see the thousands of people working there somewhere. They're all wearing invisible clothing, of course. And the building is completely destroyed. Now, quite often I'll show 4 sides to reactor 4 before it got torn down by remote control and sacrificing the lives of a lot of homeless. And there you see in reactor 3. Now, behind reactor 4 was a common spent fuel pool up here. It was on the same height and right alongside of reactor 4 and reactor 3 was the common spent fuel pool where they stored decades of reactor cores from all 6 reactors. Now, the stacks, which are quite a long ways away, have lethal doses of over 10 sieverts per hour. There's no way to survive running past that kind of dose in that environment. And that's being generous. The documentation actually shows around 25 sieverts at the base. So you can't physically live long enough to touch the base; it'll kill you. So when you see pictures of people allegedly walking out in paper suits that are clean, no tools, and it's ridiculous to suggest they're in reactor 4. Now that could be homeless that they sacrificed. There is a lot of dead homeless missing. In 2015, there was a shrine in northern Japan where they were bringing ashes of some of these victims, but they never had a name or an address. These were the homeless. Go ahead, Monique. I'm sorry.
Well, I was thinking when with the homeless and so on, is that in Japan a huge problem? Yeah, you don't hear a lot about that in Japan. Maybe
Well, it
also,
was.
huh?
It was.
It was.
They
Oh,
killed them. They killed a lot of homeless.
yeah.
I'm not laughing. That's the gallows laughing for
Yeah,
the
I
enemy.
understand, but they
Yeah.
force. I know also another situation, but you as well, that they
So
forced people to
they
help.
actually. That's right. Thank you. Go ahead.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was
No, that's
thinking
a great point.
of other situations where they forced people, even from a cinema, to help with cleaning up nuclear stuff. That's
Right after Sellafield in England in 1957 melted down, they went to the local theaters. And back in those days, the poor people sat in the back rows, the rich people sat in the front rows, right? Because that was the original big screen TV back in those days. And we're talking 1957. And so they went into the theaters, the police did. They didn't go to the other nuclear power plants or nuclear universities or ask the military or nuclear corporations to go into the meltdown, the mixed oxide fuel meltdown at Sellafield in the United Kingdom. They went to the theaters, kidnapped the people from the back rows of the theater, and had them pushing the fuel rods out of the graphite reactor core at Sellafield. The whole story is, we should do another show just on that one, because that was absurd what they actually done. We've done the same thing in Chernobyl. They've done the same thing
mm,
for Mayak.
yeah,
And we don't know where else these accidents have taken place where they've done the same
exactly.
thing. Like we know they do it at Hanford, for instance, which is United America.
Mm,
And Hanford, in the 50s and 60s during the Manhattan projects, they produced so much waste because they didn't know what they were doing. Very high level waste. They couldn't keep up with it. They just dumped it in pits in the soil. And it was 450 billion gallons in just one instant was dumped into continuously over a decade or so, was dumped into soil. That if you took a aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, and wrapped it around the entire planet, that's how much we're talking about with 450 billion gallons. And the problem with that is that a liter of that at the bus station will kill everybody for a million years that tries to get on the bus. It's by the liters. So they dump that into the soil, which is right alongside the Columbia River, which, by the way, has tens of thousands of farms downstream that are fed by that aquifer. Like when you start looking at the big pictures, my goodness,
mm,
this is absolute madness. When you go back to Fukushima, 16,000 workers had quit in 2012. So these weren't workers, these were homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants that don't speak the language, like Monique had alluded to there earlier. And they might have sacrificed them just for those pictures. There's no way that you can survive in that environment. And these are very. This not like you got all kinds of videos and different pictures of this happening. These are unique. And so the cover story goes that the building looks like the building to your left, not to the right, even though they're both the official story. And the building to your left would be the top of the building where they store the reactor cores for decades, what's known as the fuel pools, which is really interesting. Why would you put that on top of the reactors? When you have a meltdown, you can never recover it and you would lose it into the environment. So it almost seems hard to imagine how that's not part of the big picture is for this eventually to happen. Now, this picture was an extraordinary picture. This was one of the very few times we got a high quality picture, because they're very secretive in this industry. One of the few times we have a high quality picture. And we were actually able to zoom right in on the buildings. And so when you see these buildings have the beautiful pictures, when you actually look at the exterior, they didn't clean up the debris. You can see the debris.
Yeah.
Didn't clean the debris off the roofs, even roofs over here, for instance. And they put these contraptions on top of buildings, but don't physically touch that building. And the same thing with reactor one. That don't physically touch the building, but they pretend that, and that was the end of it, right? Oh, we got the fuel out, have a nice day. And in reality, it was they lost it. So why was it so important for them to cover that up?
Mm-hmm.
And the cement you see in the background is not normal. They put that there because the detonation spread the fuel rods and the pellets everywhere. And most of the site is covered in steel plates with cement, and then pavement, and then more steel plates, then more cement, and more pavement, until it's about 10 feet higher than it originally was. So when you start looking closely at the picture, I was able to extrapolate these pictures. You'll never see these anywhere else. That was a rare picture. And after that, Japan, after that picture right here, and I scrutinized this picture, you weren't able to download the Japanese pictures from their websites anymore. They actually changed it. And I always said, now this is not one of, this is a screen capture of the original one. But this was the stuff I was extrapolating from it. I was able to determine that, wait a second, why didn't they clean up the debris? Why didn't they clean up the debris if it looked like that to your left, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it looked like that, when it actually looks like, because you put a cover over the building to your right, and it looks like that, and they pretend that now that it looks like the pictures to your left. That was stunning that they actually done that. I think we're almost through this series. And it's just, so they done that to two buildings and pretended they got the fuel out of the pools, but they didn't. So why would the world media take a chance and tell a lie like that? And how many other times have they done stuff like that, I wonder? So Chernobyl is to your left, Fukushima, just a single reactor, is to your right. So if you go officially, Chernobyl is the world's worst accident, but it's impossible because Chernobyl is actually, or Fukushima is actually real. And Chernobyl was really bad.
Mm-hmm.
The China syndrome, the steam coming out of the ground in one instant was 4.7 sieverts per hour, or 20% more than it was in June. So if you walk through the steam, you will die that day for sure. You can see the desperation. They weren't sending us scientists or sending us academics. They were sending us people who don't mind dying. And then there's actually videos of them talking about that. They're talking to the temporary work sites and other entities that are using victims of society for work to send them those people. Again, I can't stress enough the significance of losing the fuel pools, so people that are not aware of that. They built that contraption off-site, brought it in, and sacrificed who knows how many homeless to get it finished. And that was the original pictures. Okay, so for number, unless Monica wants to throw something out there.
Well, maybe it's for a very short in between that again a lot of people say thank you for your story and thank you for being here. And as I said, the questions again for the people who maybe dropped in later on for questions, there will be at least 45 minutes for your questions, and Dana loves to answer them, and also tough questions.
Like tough questions.
Tough questions. So
there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a stupid question, folks.
No, exactly. And
when it comes to nuclear, it's such a confusing topic.
Exactly. And I maybe it's also good, just a few minutes, just not a break, but just
take a little break, and I'll just look at the comments over to my right.
Because
and see if I can spot anything to go ahead, Monique.
Yeah, because I can imagine it for a lot of people. Suddenly you see all these pictures. I had that the first time when I saw these pictures of. By the way, you got beautiful quality of these pictures. That's also a story on its own, huh? what I
Yeah, I'm
recall
very
from your live
fortunate.
streams, because later on, that's also a trick. There is already so long, but you must know that a technique of getting sharp pictures, and it's yeah,
You're
but it,
concentrating on scooping it while it's available before it gets
mm,
denigrated down the road. We got
exactly.
one question. Didn't cut you off. Is this creating the weather problems? Yes. And I'm about to show you that actually when we start the next set. I'll explain that part to you, how this changes the weather, creates super typhoons, super cyclones,
Mm,
supercell hurricanes, and how it creates forest fires, how
mm,
the radiation kills the bacteria in your forest and the fungus. And so now the forest, the ecosystem can't break down the litter or the foliage. And what happens now is the forest doesn't soak up water anymore because it doesn't need it. It's not breaking down
mm,
because the rest of the ecosystem can't survive without the fungus and the bacteria in the forest, right? That's part of your ecosystem. So now you have what's known as a dry forest, and the water runs off it instead of soaking into it.
mm,
So the foliage in the litter doesn't get broken down and it gathers up. Eventually, you have lightning strikes, and now you have this incredible amount of litter. And because there's so much of it, you have all these big particles of fire floating around at 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures and landing and starting other forest fires. And this causes a chain reaction of forest fires
mm.
because the litter and foliage normally wouldn't exist in that capacity.
Is it, by the
And
way, this? Yeah, you because what
go ahead.
I'm not
That's
sure
okay.
because we have that question answer, of course, later on. But I was thinking now you mentioned this, like, is this with the fires? Not only is the draft, of course, incredible out of balance in the world on Earth,
Right.
but as well I see how trees burn. Very strange. Is that also is that a
Right.
weird
Because
question or
they're
is
not,
that?
no, they're not able to soak up the water anymore. They're not able to, right? And
Okay.
so the trees can't exist without bacteria and fungus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the there's many different species live in a tree, for instance. And so, like a spider, for instance, can't tie on to the trees here on the east coast and the west coast because they suck up the radiation. I got some studies will explain that coming up. But the plants will suck up the radiation. And where does the plant? How does the plant grow? It creates new leaves and tips, right at the very tips of each branch. So all the water gets sucked up to the tips of the branches, and that feeds the whole tree. So spiders and a lot of insects like to hang out in that area. Can't hang out there because the radiation is there pulsing energy at the speed of light.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're seeing on the East Coast is spiders are tying on to buildings and houses and vehicles and infrastructure, but not to trees and bushes. So it's the strangest thing imaginable
Mm,
because it's also the reason that you're seeing them on the tree on the infrastructure in the houses is because the insect eating species got mostly exterminated in the first decade. And because they're very vulnerable, they're bioaccumulating the radiation dramatically. So most of the little birds you're seeing, at least on the East Coast for sure, and the West Coast, well, certainly the coastline of the Northern Hemisphere, is going to be insect-eating birds. And to give you context, there was around a study on around um, 50 or 34 nesting pairs of small insect-eating birds. And in their spring, they were raising their fledglings for about 21, 22 days. And they ate, according to the studies, around 5.6 million insects in 21 days in 34 nests. And so each little bird needed a dramatic amount of insects each day.
mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing here on the East Coast is the forests are actually silent now. But about 3 years ago, you didn't see them, but at least you heard them in the forest. Now you don't hear them in the forest at all either, and you don't see them in the forest. And I do a lot of research on that kind of stuff. We're now I'm going to talk. I'm going to go through another set of radioactive fallout, and I'm going to show you a bunch of disposition radioactive fallout that covered the planet and just run you through those different countries that had put out models based on radioactive fallout, which is what you should be looking at right now. And the first model you're looking at is the numbers from TEPCO. And the radioactive fallout covers...
Sorry, now you're sharing. Now you're sharing. Yeah, now everyone sees it. All right.
Okay, so the first picture we're looking at, that's good. Thank you. No, you got to keep an eye on things too, right?
Yeah. Multitasking, no problem.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, no, you're busy. You got a lot of sites going at one time. So we got Neptunium-239 is a really nasty isotope, and this decays to plutonium-239 with a 24,000 year half-life, and there's 10 half-lives per isotope. You don't need to really know the details, the minutiae of certain stuff, but we might get into it randomly. So the radioactive fallout that these depictions are going to show is covering the entire planet. This model is about 20. This is 20 days right here. This one's 20 days of radioactive fallout of Neptunium. And over here, it's 21 days of fallout. So these numbers were provided by TEPCO. And that was 19 days, and this is 30 days to your right of Neptunium fallout. This model, did I skip past one at a time? This model is plutonium-239 dispersal, and this is based on TEPCO's total release. Now, their numbers are not based on the actual inventories, the melter reactors, the fuel pools. A lot of these are based on venting. They're not based on the actual meltdown. So multiplying by several million to get the accurate radioactive fallout. But as we go through this, it'll help. And now this is different countries. There was a study showing 1,500 atoms of radioactive sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs per cubic meter of air in California. Now the models, as you'll see, like I showed you for plutonium, is not just going to be California, it's going to be the whole coastline and then the whole planet after 30 days, right? Most models are based on 20 to 30 days. So unprecedented. Now the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs that they're talking about in this study, these are from spraying salt water on the reactor cores. And what that done, and you knew this from the 50s and 60s from nuclear testing, was it liberated the sulfur. And the sulfur created spherical balls, kind of like a soccer ball type shape. And, with all the lines on it, think of it as a soccer ball. Now, this can ingest uranium, plutonium, curium, americium, these hot radioactive isotopes, and becomes a super hot particle. They're not typically solutable in water, but they're liberated easily. And they're like waves crashing on your coastline or through evaporation. But they're also considered hot particles. And a hot particle is a lethal dose over time. It causes all kinds of illnesses and diseases. So now we have studies also. This was a study on 1 million becquerels a square meter over the West Coast after the reactor's explosions. And this was based on, I can't even remember off the top of my head. I'll remember in a second. Rain with 20 million particles of iodine-131 per liter fell on the U.S. during post-Fukushima peak. So this is enough to saturate the thyroid glands and it goes everywhere else too. It sequesters in your muscles and your organs too. But it gets attracted to your thyroid gland. Your thyroid glands in insects and birds and mammals and animals and everything else, particularly kids and particularly women, the thyroid glands are producing radioactive hormones. And a lot of these hormones are now stored also in the pituitary gland, which is in your brain. And this is really bad for development, particularly for children and insects and newborn species and the wonderful, just amazing amount of life that we had on this planet. Now, correspondingly, you expect to see studies of iodine 129. So for every iodine 121 produced, there's around 10 times more iodine 132, 30 times more iodine 133, 31 times more iodine 129. And so there's a corresponding 129. Now, the iodine 132 and 133 are 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating the thyroid glands than the 131 is. The 131 is really, really, really effective. But the 132, 133 is very short half-life, but the damage is permanent. And so now when you saturated the thyroid, because we're only acknowledging thyroid, this goes throughout your whole body, by the way, and your body has to attack everything. This was sustained. Both of these studies were from Canada. This one was out of Ottawa, Canada. Elevated levels continued for months. So think of an invisible snowstorm or a snowstorm. And think about the snow never melts. And think about the snow pulses cold energy every second at the speed of light for millions of years. And the snow never melts, never goes away. It snows every day. That's what radioactive fallout basically is, except it's radiation. You can't see it, you can't smell it, can't hear it or feel it or taste it or perceive it. Now, insects probably can, but we can't. And this is very, very harmful radiation. Now, this means if you find this, these are very nasty, but they're considered markers too. So if you're finding this, you would see huge amounts of cesium, uranium, plutonium, the americium, the neptuniums, the strontiums, and a lot of these are bone seekers. And for children, in particular, for instance, of all species, it gets in the bones and mutates their stem cells. And so it's a very insidious. It's an actual weapon, and the doctors in the 50s described it as a biological weapon. And so when you see these types of corresponding studies of different ratios of isotopes in different facets of the countries or the continent, that all of a sudden is pretty hard to contest. Cesium 137 forecast for North America. This was France's IRSN model. And I actually got that coming up in a bit. I screwed that one up. Weekends off at Fukushima. Now, one plant worker could be seen because of the radioactive steam coming out of the ground. He would abandon the sites for extended periods. But this was kept, a lot of this disappeared, of course, after the first couple of years. It's a catastrophe for every citizen of the world, as I showed you the radioactive fallout. In Tokyo, it was a stunning 500 trillion becquerels a kilogram found of the radioactive glass. This was the sulfur. This was another model based on 20 days of radioactive fallout of xenon 133. Will actually burn a hole through your lungs and end up in the bones. This was a model based on 40 days of radioactive fallout from Noah. And this is another model. The cesium 134, 137, or 134, 137, based upon a short period of time. This one in particular, in the bottom part, is 26 days of radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. So you can see the progression by the 18th. The accident happened March 11, 2011. 7 days up here, etc., etc., etc.
And can
So
I ask
go
you,
ahead.
Dana?
No,
Is
go
it
ahead.
it is still continuing? The fallout. It's make its round around Earth, or
Every 40 days.
every 40 days. Yeah. Then I hear.
Originally, that's how the plume was working. The
Yeah.
big pulses would come back around every 40 days.
Yeah.
It could take centuries because it's still melting down, it's still hemorrhaging out. And by the way, all fuel pools are releasing plumes each day from around the world. And so it's at some point we're going to have to deal with this. At some point, this is the conversation we're going to have. And we might be 100 years ahead, unfortunately, but this will be we have to deal with this. We can't have a future and species and radiation at the same time.
Well, it's
But that's a really
incredible.
great point.
So
Go
it's
ahead.
incredible because in France, I mean, that's close to the Netherlands. They have so many nuclear power plants. Incredible lot. I mean,
And they're all surrounded by farms in France. And France's La Hague nuclear fuel reprocessing site,
mm,
it's like a banana, they say, in potato chips to radiation, but they have 500 security guards
phew.
to protect the bananas and the potato chips, of course. And so this is another model of the Xenon 133. And these models, a lot of them are based upon venting. They're not based upon the actual nuclear meltdowns and the inventories that were lost. This was a German model of the Pacific Ocean over 6 years. Now, the problem with that one was they were talking about just hemorrhaging into the ocean. And that was really downplaying it because the airborne plumes covered the planet in about 20 days. So that model doesn't matter because that was polluted. Now, we do have the documentation showing that the entire ocean was saturated with cesium 137. And then you would extrapolate multiple isotopes after that. This is the actual video of NOAA's model, which is the American government's model of radioactive fallout. And this is based on 40 days. And this will give you some context of how now this doesn't really do it justice. The French model coming up, which is probably the last one, and I guess one more model. So that's 40 days of radioactive fallout when that model stops. This never goes away, of course. Very high concentrations of hot particles in the Pacific Northwest. Hot particles. Hot particles. Hot particles, you just need one. And you put 200 million of them on the head of a needle, but you can't see them. So one is pretty insignificant when you think about the context. Think about on a sunny day with the dust floating around in your room. Think about a single one of those particles when it gets in your lung. If it's a hot particle, your body will attack it for the rest of your life and eventually build a tumor around it.
So the hot particle, and it's also that people can. I mean, I'm also listening, of course, a lot of times already to your live streams, but I want to also be clear. The hot particle is active one. Is that the right word for it?
It's more energetic. So an
Mm,
iodine particle is really really bad, but a plutonium particle is devastating,
mm,
right? So there's
mm,
different. Uh, these are considered man-made isotopes, by the way, folks. These are not created by the sun or the solar system. We call them man-made because they're unique to humanity. We haven't discovered these anywhere else in the planet. And that's why nothing on the planet has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. And so you're
mm,
very vulnerable to a particle that is man made, and your body's response is to attack it for the rest of its life, your life, with white blood cells. And that has to displace the red blood cells. Your red blood cells carry oxygen nutrition. So if you get enough into you, they call that leukemia
mm,
because your body's saturated with white blood cells. And as you start bioaccumulating radiation, you compromise your immune system, so you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign are now lethal and deadly, particularly to the elderly and the children. So one of the things we noticed was sudden death syndrome spiked after Fukushima.
mm.
I'm going to cover a little bit of that coming up, and you feel free to cut me off anytime, Monique. I'm pretty
Yeah,
good
I
at
don't want to
picking up.
interrupt you. No, that sounds so impolite, but also I'm really
No, it's
following you,
good.
and at the same time, I really feel like I'm then talking also from my own when I'm listening. I already saw so much about you, but then still, it's good to now and then. Okay, okay, to
Yeah,
really take
it's
it
perfectly
easy
fine. Yeah.
in letting it in. But
So we'll finish through this cycle and we'll come back to the main screen for a few minutes. And I got around 8 of these cycles, and not all of them most of them are really short. Radiation levels on the U.S. West Coast spiked a million times normal. This is the last one of this cycle, the last three. A million times normal of cesium. So this was the French government, and this is a million times normal after 7 days. This is on the 18th. So a million to 10 million times cesium 137. This is extraordinary. This is from the French government, by the way, of the radioactive fallout. And a lot of countries stopped talking about it because they want to promote nuclear, and they can't promote nuclear and demonize it at the same time, right?
Mhm.
So radiation data from Seattle survey may be withheld by the feds for national security purposes. Now you paid for, the Americans paid for the the employees to monitor. They gave them the authority. They gave them the equipment. They gave them the education. And when you finally had an event, they decided to withhold it. It was over 1,000 times normal right away after Fukushima in Washington. And then another study showed 450,000 times above detection levels and persisted for weeks, which lines up to all the other ones that I showed you. These different types of isotopes being isolated and documented. So now you have a legacy of different huge quantities, unheard of pre-nuclear or Fukushima quantities of fallout. These are unprecedented numbers. And this model didn't show up the way I thought it was going to. It showed up as a tiny one. My apologies. This is French's model of the radioactive fallout based on 16 days. So 16 days, or no, this one is 30 days, but when I said it, we were at 16 days. So now you're at about 25 days of radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. And that really that's a frightening part of the story. And so the next one, I'm going to stop for a second. And the next one we're going to cover is a short one of radioactive fallout just in Japan. I'm going to come over to the regular screen and visit.
Yes, I will take care of
Uh,
it. So, here we go.
yes.
Yeah. And I will pour myself a tea, if you don't mind.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to check the comment sections here for any comments.
And there are questions because I'm checking also. I have a specific, also what I check, that's a central thing on my iPad in which all the questions are being collected. So then they
Awesome.
can fire them all to you later on.
Yeah. That's so much fun anyway. When
Yeah.
you do the questions, right?
Um,
Because you bring up subjects we forget about.
well,
And that's what's interesting for people.
yeah,
You go ahead
exactly.
and make your cup of tea.
Yeah. I'm sorry,
I'm
but
going to suggest
I really
I
need.
should do the same. I should do the same thing then in that case.
Yeah, you have your tea also with you, or
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Make a cup of tea. Everybody should take a 5 minute breather, I guess.
well, I thought so because I see now it's
Yep.
coming to. Yeah, it's 5 to 9. Maybe it's nice to have a 5 minute break and then we can continue.
Because we wanted to
Oh
finish up at nine
no! Don't
thirty.
take a break. Here it says. If oh no, that's if the stream stops. Oh man, right? I think it was a joke. Well, that's it. That happens in the chat, of course.
Um, yeah. Well, like you say,
But yeah,
we wanted to take questions and answers at 9:30. Was it, Money?
yeah, 9:45 because I have
So
longer
in
time. So when it
45 minutes.
yeah, approximately, but I can now continue past
That's fine. That works
10:30.
out.
But because
That'll get us right through. I didn't mean to
yeah,
cut you off.
because
Yeah.
what was planning for you? Maybe you can say a bit about what you were planning on talking about, or this, or do you also have a segment about maybe the Netherlands? Maybe people find it also interesting, or Europe.
Well, the models are covering Europe,
Mm-hmm.
right? The
Yeah,
radioactive fallout is covering Europe. You can
yeah,
see that
exactly.
clearly in those models I showed you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the questions, when we get to the questions, I'm sure we're going to run into
Yeah, and I
a
have
lot of stuff.
also, when I hear you talk, then I have, and of course now I have you in the live, so then I think, well, then I fire off as well. But I had
Yeah,
already
that's
many
good.
questions in between, and then I felt like, no, just leave it for later on, or first the
I'll
people.
cover. I actually end up covering most of the questions before the show is over,
Yeah, you
because
think so?
I
Well,
do go down. I'm trying to do an educational program. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm trying to do an educational program, and I bounce around a little bit sometimes, but I'm generally pretty disciplined in how I'm going to tell the story.
uh-huh, yeah. Well, I understand, but yeah, yeah, that's a good
And
thing as well.
it's okay. So I'll just give people an idea of what we're going to talk about after. I got to go put the kettle on, but just so people can have something to hang on to for a few minutes. Let me
Yeah,
get
you
this
should
back
take
up.
your tea if you like.
I'm just going to share the screen to give you a quick, for 1 second. Where'd that go? Oh, down here. So next we're going to cover the die-offs, some of the research that I've done. And that'll give you a whole different insight of, and I don't know why I still got that little map there on my screen, but I do. I'll just try to get rid of it, I guess, but it's still there. So we done research expeditions for 6 years back and forth to Alaska. That's one of the vessels. I was out on that boat in the last 7 days 5 times doing research, and so we have multiple boats that we used for research expeditions. That was reminiscent. The sailboat used to tow the two Zodiacs. Now,
Mm.
currently, I just use the two Zodiacs,
Mm.
and I just use day trips, right? And that was me 3 years ago. I gained a lot of weight in the last 3 years. I've been that weight my whole life, and then in the last 3 years, pow! I just gained a lot of weight. Then I had 3 heart attacks 3 months ago, and had 7 stents put in my valves, which was really exceptional. Really, that's probably the most ever done in the province was 7. So I'm very fortunate to be here to tell the story. I probably shouldn't have survived it. 100% blockage in 3 valves. I was on my way out, obviously, right? And
Mm.
so they flew in a special team to do surgery on me because they said the local hospital couldn't do surgery, wasn't allowed to do surgery on me. And I said, well, what are you talking about?
Mm.
I was confused, right? The nurse, the doctor came, the doctor from the hospital in the city, because they've transferred me to the city, said, "You're with the CIA, FBI," and I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, we can't do surgery on you." And the nurse said, "Well, you couldn't tell us if you were, right?"
Mm.
And I was like, "I absolutely, positively am not.
Yeah,
Nothing to do
because
whatsoever."
also last time, and I heard about that, and then I was thinking, like, were you
What the
not
hell,
afraid,
right?
like, that it could be influenced because you're not really liked by MSM and by many high up people in the world. I was
That's being
thinking
polite.
about that.
Yeah,
Weren't you maybe afraid of, oh, maybe they find a
going to
way
kill me
now
or something,
to
right? Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
because I know that's
I was
serious.
going to die. I was going to die that day,
Mm.
and I wasn't thinking clear. I was worried, and I couldn't. If I stood up, then it takes 2 hours to stabilize me for the nurses, and so I
Mm.
was in really bad shape at this stage. Uh, I didn't know. I thought they were kind of joking with me originally, but when when the head nurse came in and said to the local, they flew in a doctor and a head nurse. They just came in to do that surgery and then they flew out again. But because the locals weren't allowed to do it, so they wanted to. There's powers that be wanted me in the mix, I would imagine, and this
Mm.
is how they saw fit to do it. We got him on the table. Let's do all of these valves because he's the only person to have the conversation. That was my takeaway after I have time to reflect on it. But they, because I had already done one surgery 2 weeks before that, and they said he couldn't do the stints. I was a candidate now for open heart surgery,
Mm.
and so I was already familiar with the initial process. But when I went in this time, this was all business. Now they did use half to or 3/4 of the nurses and staff was from the hospital, but the head nurse and the doctor weren't from Newfoundland at all.
Mm.
And so, there was other people there, checks and balances, right? I felt okay about that because it takes around 10 people to do this, right? They were all business. This was really impressive to watch. You're awake the whole time. And I knew right away this was all business. They were very reassuring. It was very sincere.
Mm.
And this was all business. This went nonstop for an hour and a half, and they put 7 stints in. Now, typically, you're only going to get one or two.
Yeah, yeah.
Extraordinary cases was 5. like one off was a 5 stint.
Mm.
They put 7 in me, and so you're assuming that there's a light side to some dark sides, right? You
Always.
know, we are Canada is controlled by the nuclear industry, but it's hard to comprehend until you hear the whole story that I'm telling, and that's the only spot you're ever going to hear the story from, by the
Mm.
way.
Yeah,
That
and yeah. By the
yeah,
way,
as you're familiar,
I
right?
have so many questions. No, but I was thinking
It's good.
because you're talking now a bit about what you experienced with these tents and so on. But I was thinking like you're living in the west, not east side, yeah, the west coast of Canada, and
I was doing
and
the research up there.
and
Yeah,
there also, yeah.
heavy
I
radioactive
wonder,
fallout.
yeah, how did you respond to that, or how do you deal with that? I mean,
I moved to the East Coast. Yeah, I
yeah.
done the research for 6 years to Alaska. Back before we're gonna breach that really
Mm.
soon here, and we'll just keep going because we will run out of time pretty quick. We'll
Yeah,
discover.
we're running, and you didn't have your tea, but
Uh,
don't you really don't want something to drink with you, or
I
you?
got tea,
Oh, you
and
got
that's a
tea.
little warm, but I got ice water there, so we'll keep going
All right,
because
so
we got a big mix here. I would like to try to get through as much of it as I can.
exactly. Well, let us
Oh,
continue, and before we continue, I
yeah,
think maybe for I don't know if Barry and Miranda listen, but the two moderators, by the way, great moderators also.
yeah. Thank you,
And
folks.
thanks for being here and for taking care of so many things. And also, by the way, for putting together the questions and the people who help with that. Also, many thanks. And by the way, but I wanted to say that I don't think I'm live on Trovo. That's just, yeah, I have to deal with a lot of technical stuff, but we will
Yeah.
continue, Dana. But I have to
Okay.
communicate that that's a pity that I'm not apparently not live on Trovo because I went live on Odyssey. That's the disadvantage of
Ow. Yeah.
7 plus platforms live. So
Maybe you can post it thereafter, and that'll
yeah,
work out for those.
but I
I don't
made
know.
I yeah, but I made promos and I feel then responsible and a bit
Oh, sure.
guilty,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
me. Oh man, but yeah, I
Yeah.
let
That's
go.
that's okay. That's too bad to the
Oh
folks that
wait,
were out there.
I am live on Trovo. Okay, well,
All right. So we're good to go. Uh,
continue.
okay. So let's run through the research, some of the research expeditions so people can actually comprehend what's going on. The picture to your left is the tsunami from NOAA. The picture to the right is radioactive emissions into the Pacific Ocean from NOAA. It's 2011. The picture to your left was shared by the nuclear industry, claiming it was the radioactive emissions into the Pacific Ocean. When people bought into that narrative, because that was perpetrated out there under control opposition. When people bought into it, then they insulted them, said, "Hey, stupid, it's the tsunami. So don't worry about Fukushima." But in reality, NOAA had a Fukushima emissions into the Pacific Ocean and to your right. So they hid that away and only showed the left. It was very deceitful and dishonest. I, in response to everything that I was learning about Fukushima, I decided to launch research expeditions. And you can see 3 of the boats that I was using at one point. Now I'm using the 2 Zodiacs. The research went from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada to Alaska to your right. And there's 27,000 islands there. And so I'd done the West Coast, the open ocean, and all the pinch points where the ocean had to flow to get to the interior islands. I'd done it multiple times a year, and we're talking about around 900-mile distance of treacherous coastlines. I was gone 3 to 4 to 5 months a year each time for 6 years. And
Hmm.
so we want to see if the species were harmed, and to our absolute unbelievable horror, the species to your left, what I'm going to show you in the next set of pictures, are exterminated. And the pictures to the right are the before and after authentic pictures. The pictures to the right are the ones I took. And now I dove this as a commercial diver as a young man. And the pictures to your left, the species, there should be around 7,000 plus highly visible species. And this is typically what shallow water would look like in British Columbia all the way into Alaska, would be this incredible diversity of over 7,000 highly visible species, around 700 algae, which is like kelps, around 480 species of worms. There was all kinds of shellfish. There was razorback and gooey, what known as gooey ducks, and abalone clams. There was clams like manillas and little necks. You're seeing there certainly in these pictures. And the beaches you're looking at are actually made of the shells themselves from breaking down over generations. Now the beaches have no shells but just the sand. There were 74 species of the starfish you're looking at to your left. Each species came in multiple colors. So when you see the coral, there was 74 species of sponges. There is around 72, 74 species of sea anemones. The sea anemones come in multiple, they're the green blobs, the red blobs, the orange blobs. There's around 74 species. Each species of starfish and sea anemones and sponges comes in multiple colors per species. To your right, you can see there's no color left on the beaches. To your left again, you see just under the low tide lines, there's an incredible, you physically can't touch the dirt without stepping on a lot of different lives at the one time. Now there's no life, no color whatsoever. We repeated the research year after year because it was hard to tell the story without documenting the species. So what happens is a cup of the salt water of that ocean will normally contain about 1 billion creatures, 75 to 100 million of them per glass of salt water would be the phytoplankton. That's the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain, and it makes 50% of the oxygen on the planet. The rest of it was the eggs, the larvae, what I describe all my life as the soup of life. So if you took 100 gallons of a healthy ocean to another planet with an ocean with no life, and we're able to get those species to live there, you could transfer the life to another planet. We have lost that diversity completely. And after 6 years of doing the research, so my little zodiac, by the way, should never be able to land on a beach in British Columbia because there's just billions and billions of the sea urchins, the reds and the purples, the greens, and now there's nothing. You can go ashore anywhere. And this was one of the most iconic oceans. This is a tropical rainforest, 27,000 islands. The diversity of life is, I've never heard tell of seen anything compared to it. You can see a low tide. So low tide, the radioactive fallout is very vulnerable. And a lot of these you'll notice there's hills and mountains in the background. So the radiation washes down to your coastlines, also covers your glaciers. And this is an iconic picture to your left of all the starfish. This is something I'm quite familiar with, where at low tide it's very difficult to make your way up to the high tide. On the right hand side, there is no species, and it's really amazing. Now I meandered for months and months at a time, just took my time. I was in no rush, and I scoured the coastline in 20-kilometer jumps. And what I mean by that was I would move 20 kilometers and set up shop and research for 2 or 3 days the species on both sides of that, and then move 40 kilometers and then cover 20 kilometers on both sides, then move another 40 kilometers a few days later, weather permitting, of course, and done the whole coastline. The attempt was to do the whole coastline, succeededly in doing the entire coastline of Canada, all the way up to Alaska, right on the Alaska border. And those species never came back. Now, at the high tide line, there would be around 30,000 insects that are dependent on the low tide. Now, the low tide up there is from 19 feet to 25 feet tide exchange. I dove that for thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. And those species are gone. Not maybe, but they're permanently gone. We'll never see those pictures again. We'll never take them again. That was 2011, 2010, 2009 pictures. Then on the right hand side was post Fukushima radioactive fallout. This also melted the glaciers. It doesn't allow the ice to crystallize. And what happens is that water that was this hard glacier ice that takes thousands of years to build up is gone. And now what we have is snowpack in the winter, but disappears during the summer. So normally during the heat waves, the glaciers would melt extra water, and that would feed the lakes, the streams, the estuaries all the way to the ocean, and would regulate their temperatures regardless every summer. You can count on the cold water coming from the glaciers and regulating the coastline temperatures. And so in years of drought, salmon and migratory uh, trout and eels and stuff like this could still get up the river. And now what we're seeing over the last number of decades is that they're laying their eggs in the estuaries where they can't survive. That's not normal. They've never done that. They can't make it back up the river, and the rivers are hot. So also that means the the insects, the frogs, the whole ecosystem, all these rivers and lakes and streams to the Rocky Mountains, the Cascades, have lost their biodiversity, and the land has lost its bacteria and the fungus. So the ecosystem is not there. It's not soaking up water anymore. The water, rainwater, now runs right to the rivers, and the rivers ends up washing a lot of the eggs that would have survived will now get washed down to the estuaries and into the ocean again because it doesn't get soaked up like it normally would have. Uh, okay, so we've done this research. Now currently doing research on the east coast of Canada for the last 3 years. We're concentrating a lot on insects in the forest and migratory birds. Where I'm to currently is the biggest migratory bird run on the entire planet. It's around, for saltwater birds, it's around 46 million birds a year. And I've been researching it for 3 years since I moved to the east coast of Canada. Uh, and I was stunned. There's no fish jumping in the ponds, yet the fish are there because there's no insects for them to jump after.
Can
There's
I
no spiders.
interrupt? Can I now,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
urging for a question, like you
Sure.
showed all these pictures, which, well, I feel how
You've seen them
these
before yourself.
species are gone, but are there other people who are, I'm sure there are other people who do the West Coast somehow, at times visiting the coast. Do they, or do the people in the neighborhood of you where you live notice that too? That something has
Oh yeah.
changed?
I stopped into so that whole coastline is isolated. There's no roads into the
Mm,
27,000 islands,
mm.
obviously, right?
Yeah,
But there is native
yeah.
communities, and so one of the first things I do is go into the native communities, and they don't like people coming into their communities. But
I
um,
understand.
I would, I've been doing it for a long time, so I go into these communities and I ask. The first thing I ask for is there a lot of rare cancers and
Mm-hmm.
diseases in your community you're noticing? And the stories I'm hearing are horrifying. It was just everywhere I went, it was horrifying. When I asked them about salmon, the typical response was there's not very much, but and the ones we're seeing are really skinny. And but they're not they don't have an education the traditional way. They're going to blame it on local stuff because that's their environment is the local area. They've been there 10,000, 12,000 years, generationally. And so they got a tendency to blame it on just it's not that they all don't have an education. And like again, how many people are aware of this subject that haven't come in contact with my material? Very, very, very few people are able to articulate the whole story, right? If
Mm.
they haven't, unless you see my presentations, if you haven't seen it, it's very difficult. You're going to run into so much propaganda that it's going to be really hard for the average person to pick, the little nuggets out
Yeah.
of the bucket of stuff they throw at you. In
Yeah,
polite
many
words.
many scenarios, many explanations. That's also so confusing
It's
and chaotic. And oh man, yeah.
80 years of telling you it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in sunshine and
Mm,
climbing mountains and sleeping next to somebody and stuff like that, which got nothing to do with man-made radiation.
mm,
80 years is a very effective way to propagandize the entire population. They used Hollywood, of course,
mm,
mass media, controlled opposition. And when they have debates, there's always controlled opposition and never bring in. I really, I was really shocked that I'm not finding other people like myself, even after all these years. And
Mm-hmm.
I've done 600 radio shows, and I've done, close to 1,800 presentations on this topic alone, like we're doing tonight. And so it's really surprising that the world is still not. So we're going to be talking about the tanks, and a lot of people might be familiar with the tanks at Fukushima. We're going to run you through that coming up really quick because we're on a countdown timer of 2 questions, which is fine.
Well, don't feel too hurried up, because keep it easy.
Keep going. Yeah, yeah,
Keep
we'll keep
going,
going.
but because I have the time, so and the people can always rewatch it, of course. But it's I have
There's a
time now,
lot.
past 10:30, so I can even go as far as 11:15. Yes, so that's a lot of time, but
Okay,
yeah,
well, I'm going to jump
continue.
into the next section unless you got something you want to
Well,
throw out there.
it is still what you say as well. How come I yeah I try to find out how, like for example in the 80s many people were against nuclear energy, and there were a lot of demonstrations of the people and so on, and a lot of consciousness. But the generation nowadays, I think everyone is too distracted. But yeah, it
Yeah,
is a pity that it's not being. I mean, everyone
it's,
needs their right to, like you, needs
yeah.
to have a voice. And I don't get it that you're still on maybe 1,700 followers or subscribers on YouTube. It's
No,
so weird.
1,300. And they took down my first site when I was
Yeah.
looking for spiders, reporting on spiders that were missing. That site had 24,200 subscribers for 5 years. I never
Yeah.
gained one, never lost one for
Mm,
5 years.
yeah. Yeah.
So they've been around a while, censoring me.
Yeah, but yeah, yeah, you're just very steadfast.
Well, yeah,
I recognize it.
I can't, uh, I can't let that be an influence, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Right. So, like
exactly.
the minute that, and that this is the whole thing, right? And so the minute that you say, well, they don't matter, and you know what? I'm gonna tell the story to help other people. They
Exactly.
lose all power, right? So what you're doing on your own, they lose all power.
Hmm.
They they want you to be scared of them, right?
Hmm.
And keeping the curtains closed and afraid to go places, and then
Hmm.
they'll just pick at you and instill that fear. But the minute that you say, "Hey, I don't care about you at all," in fact, what I'm going to do is educate the population on you and what you're up to. They got no way of dealing with that.
Hmm.
They lost all power. They don't have any, and
Yeah.
you empower everybody else that is listening to you,
Hmm.
and so that's how you win ultimately. So
Yeah.
again, with my story, um, I target the policymakers and the investors, and then everybody else after.
Hmm.
And it was originally backwards. Originally, I was targeting everybody and policymakers and investors
Hmm.
last, right?
Hmm.
Now I think about them first because that's who I got to convince. If I can convince them, eventually I'm going to convince everybody else. But the sooner I convince them, the sooner we can end nuclear
Hmm.
or disrupt it, right?
Yeah, and yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And I feel very, yeah, worried,
But
because
it's
it's
designed for people
it's
like
what
you
you
too.
say, like you cannot see it. And well, there is
Can't.
an interesting question what comes later on of tasting nuclear energy. But yeah, it is. I think it's scary that it's just invisible and it's just man-made and it's dangerous. And yeah, I'm
And it's
amazed
just
that.
hard to comprehend for the average person. You can't
Yeah,
perceive it,
I
right?
mean, also here in the Netherlands, I mean, it came all down with.
Japan is shipping food to you guys. I can guarantee you. They're
Yeah,
growing food in the nuclear wasteland.
yeah, I
I'll
saw
show you
it.
some of that coming up.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You want to talk about that, and the incredible
Yeah,
lot of bags, because why should people move out and
right.
leave everything behind? Oh, I have some questions about that, but that's maybe for later.
Yeah,
Let's.
we're actually getting there. We got two more
Yeah.
sets to get through.
Okay, well, continue, and I
We
got
got
my
two more
tea.
sets. Yeah, we got two more sets to get through. We got the tanks. We got the harmful effects of it, and we got some headlines. And so this one is really short. Let me scoot through two.
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeing the screen now. I'm
I will
sharing
show
screens
you.
right now with you. Am I sharing
Share?
screens? Yeah, I am sharing screens, right?
Not yet. I don't see
Okay.
share. So if you do that again,
No, I'll
share.
go. That's what I wanted to ask you to make sure it was.
Yeah, of course.
I missed it. There we go. Because sometimes you got to actually physically hit the entire screen and then allow. And so it should
Uh,
show up any second.
exactly. Now it's there.
Okay.
Yes.
Uh, Now I'm going to take you through. Just bear with me. So this is very short. This is only about 10, 12. So here's the picture to your left is prefectures that are highlighted that are blocked worldwide by 55 countries for a decade because of radioactive food. So we're talking about Tokyo, right alongside of Tokyo and Chiba, 250 kilometers away, and all the way to the most northerly parts of Japan. So we're talking about a huge section, not just Fukushima Prefecture. The picture to your right are the Japanese harvesting food, alongside of 1 ton bags of radiation, thousands of them, in a no-go zone, in a nuclear wasteland, a few miles from multiple ongoing nuclear reactors that are melting down, harvesting food. And that picture is from the mainstream media trying to justify it. And so when you look at the communities, this is a really good one. This is unclear, United Nations, which I don't think should exist because they have no sovereignty over your countries, and they were created after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They used to be called the League of Nations, and it's basically a military-industrial complex. According to Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower from the United States, he described them as the United Nations as the military-industrial complex. George Bush Sr., former president of the United States, described him as the New World Order. So whenever you hear tell of the New World Order, think United Nations. It's 195 militaries. And they seem to be controlling the majority of the facets of all countries. They're using their narratives for decisions, which is totally unacceptable. But anyway, so they produced, at the first year, they produced average absorbed doses to red bone marrow for adults in the prefecture. And what you're going to be looking at is to your left is the district, is the communities. The next one is population of the communities, and corresponding is doses per square meter. So 39,000 becquerels. It's like Fukushima City was 229,000 becquerels per square meter, but just of cesium. You need to add 1,000 different isotopes and to get the real numbers. So 55, not 1,000, but 55 was considered an evacuation zone, and most nuclear power plants pre-Fukushima. Now 229,000. Every house in Fukushima City, by the way, is entitled to be decontaminated. And the problem with that is you can't decontaminate a house.
Mhm.
So the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSCLEAR, they have many organizations and they back each other up. So they're really sinister. So I'll show you a bunch of communities. The center line is the doses. The left of it is the population, and left of that is the name of the cities. And you see all these different cities in alphabetical order. These communities weren't evacuated. These should have been evacuated, every one of these communities, and they didn't. And they're growing food, they're shipping it worldwide. They're
Mhm.
growing rice. Now, Fukushima Prefecture, just a single prefecture, is growing around 1 billion pounds a year of rice and shipping it worldwide. This is incredibly radioactive. They allegedly are checking for cesium, which means they're not checking. Because cesium is just one of 1,000 fission products you need to be checking for. So once you find cesium, you can quantify it by mathematical equations extrapolating the other isotopes with a mathematical ratio. So for every cesium-137 produced, after 1,000 days, strontium-90, for instance, will peak. It's going to peak for tens of thousands of days for many, many decades, and peaking at 100 strontium-90 for every cesium-137 produced. And earlier I showed you a model of a cesium-137 at 1 million to 10 million becquerels a cubic meter of air, rather. So this is unbelievably catastrophic to the ecosystem. Fukushima nuclear report was so shocking, top government official, we decided to treat it like it didn't exist. So this is the ostrich effect, where you bury your head, pretend it's never happened. Radiation data from Seattle in the United States was withheld by the Federals for National Security, seen it at 450,000 times above detection levels, persisted for weeks. High concentrations. Now, I showed you the airborne models. They cover Europe. They cover the Netherlands. They cover the entire planet. There's no country left uncovered. This was very high concentration of hot particles in the Pacific of americium plutonium. Radiation doses in central of the continent, the North American continent, was as equal to the West Coast, where I was doing the research. Now, the problem with it is that 11 becquerels a kilogram of cesium just for children will start seeing heart problems. At 50 becquerels, they'll see permanent damage to irreversible heart damage for children. And 50 becquerels is such a tiny amount that it's impossible to avoid that now. Radioactive material, by the way, like cesium and other isotopes, are brought back to the surface soil each year by plant growth and pollination. So radioactive pollen. Think of radioactive pollen worldwide, and then you're on the right trail. Think of the radiation pulsing at the speed of light, like an explosion every second. And the pulses could be felt or recorded on Geiger counters from 40 to 100 feet away, no problem in most cases. In fact, they use helicopters to fly over contaminated areas at 1,000 feet and record the energy from the pulsing. But we're also talking about physical atoms. Physical atoms. So this is becquerels, not sieverts or millisieverts or microsieverts, is the way to describe it. Levels of several dozens of sieverts possible near reactor 2. So that's a lethal dose immediately for anybody going close to reactor 2. There's no nuclear scientists who have ever visited the site until last week, when South Korea allegedly sent 20 scientists there. And they were given a tour. They weren't allowed to take any measurements, no cameras. They weren't allowed to take samples. And so we consider, and North Korea is trying to proliferate nuclear reactors, so we consider this as what they've done as irrelevant. Human civilization, we're waiting for the releases, and we will, if they're lying, we will challenge their lies. Human civilization may destroy itself. Michio Kaku, a famous physicist from California, United States, says human civilization may destroy itself. I mean, look at Fukushima. Liquefaction of 3 nuclear reactor cores. We've never seen that in history. The International Atomic Energy Agency admits there is no such thing as a safe level of radiation, that the allowable radiation standards are based on natural, not anthropogenic man-made radiation. So they should be disbanded immediately. They should also be prosecuted, but they're not a regulatory agency. They don't have any authority. They can't force a country to comply with any. Now they're the what I call the lapdog of UN. They're just another subsidy. United Nations has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of subsidies that has infiltrated many facets of everybody's worldwide lives. Doomsday-like radiation released a fire in a pool at Unit 4 would be a global catastrophe. And we've seen pictures of it, I showed you earlier. Unit 4 is actually gone. Worst case scenario assumes significant public exposure to occur by March the 12th, the day after because of reactor 1 container. And we've seen the detonations of it. So they're talking about a single reactor will contaminate the entire population. And then they decided, well, it happened, so we better hide it. And I showed you how they done that earlier, where they pretended they're in fuel pools that don't exist. How low doses radiation causes heart diseases and strokes. There was actual over 20,000 spike in heart attacks in the United States shortly, 14 weeks recorded in a section of the United States in the first 14 weeks after Fukushima. There's a street in Fukushima Prefecture, Fukushima City, where 7 people died in just 1 year, dropped dead shopping on a street from high radiation doses, right? So there's 1,800 diseases, not just heart and cancers, but there is massive cancers. I'll show you a little bit of that in a moment. Time to quit nuclear power altogether, a major U.S. paper, threatens the very existence of human civilization. And I showed you the airborne fallout and how that actually works and why that is so. It's the duty of the scientific community to reduce the public's fear and anxiety about radiation. This was the propaganda machine saying that instead of scientists educating the population, they should reduce the public's anxiety by manipulating them. 1,500 atoms was a study I showed you earlier. Washington, 100,000 times normal, we showed you earlier. Radioactive iodine levels in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, rainwater exceeded maximum contaminated levels permitted in drinking water, which means you would have irradiated the pipes and you can never use the aquifers again. Which was interesting because in the United Kingdom, when they had their, after Chernobyl, they closed 9,400 farms. So they should have abandoned Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom rather than abandon 9,400 farms. Because the radiation doesn't just look for the farms. It's poisoned all the fresh water, the air, the land, the communities, the infrastructure, the vehicles, the playgrounds, the schools, the sidewalks, everybody's air filters in every vehicle, etc. Is iodine 131 killing babies in Philadelphia? So there's a lot of them acknowledging the radioactive fallout was real, right? There's many incidences of it, but yet here's the propaganda machine. UN committee chairman studying Fukushima radiation impact. We wouldn't expect to see health effects in children, workers, or anyone else, but that's all you've really seen. Leading director in Japan, nuclear power generation and invention and may destroy the future of human beings. So there was a lot of people trying to warn you. Japan Times column, major Japan Times. As the public, possibly worldwide, sickens over time, the truth will leak out about Fukushima. The Sunday edition of Japan Times used to be done by retired forensic investigative journalist Yoshi Shimatsu. And I actually done a radio show with him for 2 years every Sunday. And he used to go in there on his bicycle. The first time he went in on his bicycle, he had 3 Geiger counters. All 3 of them broke from radiation, so much radiation. And 2 weeks later, he lost most of his teeth, fell out. Fukushima, the most serious man-made disaster in human history. Obesity rates nearly doubled. That's 2012. Excessive weight gain after nuclear crisis is a marker of radiation brain damage. So you get a lot of radiation in your body and it ends up in your brain, like your pituitary. Obesity. So you probably know a lot of people have been skinny their whole life and all of a sudden they gained a whole bunch of weight. That wasn't because they were eating. That was because of the imbalance with their pituitary and thyroid glands and adrenaline glands caused by radiation. You've seen it also in animals. And you see these connotations where it's time to make a geezer, which is a insult, right? It's a slur. Suicide squads. So what they were talking about was sending in people, elderly people to die, basically. We may not be able to live in Japan someday, which is an accurate statement. It's a 100% accurate statement. Radiation precautions for area near Seattle, Vancouver, Portland. Perhaps you need to wash your shoes. Well, if you need to wash your shoes because of radiation, you should throw it away. Now, think about this statement: as the public, possibly worldwide, sickens over time, the truth will come out about Fukushima. So you can't just make the whole public worldwide sick without making all the animals and birds and insects sick too, right? because radiation doesn't just seek out humans. All of eastern Japan evacuated if your power plant is abandoned. So nuclear is a terrible idea, and no matter how many ways we look at it. And I apologize, 'cause I know that Windows 11 got a few flaws in it. 1,000 years from now, contaminated water from Fukushima may still be entering the Pacific Ocean. Well, it never stopped going into the ocean, and it might never stop going in the ocean because it's gone into the earth in the China syndrome. You're
Mm.
finding fish at 750,000 becquerels a kilogram. Every worm or every creature in Fukushima Prefecture was contaminated with huge amounts of radiation. 1.4 million becquerels a kilogram in the worm's excrements 60 miles from a meltdown. So they never stopped growing food in this and shipping it worldwide. So that's very frightening. You can't stay in the towns overnight, but they're growing food there. And that's annoying where you get the bigger screen, but that's what we can do. Prefectures considered hot are the prefectures where they're shipping the most food worldwide currently. And a lot of these places were abandoned for 12 years. Even the lowest levels of radiation are harmful to life. And so we have to rethink exposure levels from nuclear plants. We're almost through all of this, by the way. High radiation levels prevented helicopters, so how can humans go there? Like they were claiming, see? Massive radiation release for 3 years now. And I'll explain that to you for the last part. 12 million yen. We've seen all kinds of examples where they're censoring the internet. This is where they paid Twitter $54,000 American to censor tweets about burning radioactive debris in communities. They're actually grinding up radioactive debris, bringing it to other prefectures, and burning it in incinerators. And they can't get rid of the dust after because it's so radioactive. Around the clock monitoring of blogs on nuclear power. And so I live with that now for over 12 years straight. I've been at this for about 20 years, but imagine that they're monitoring you 24 hours a day. So it's no good just to monitor you. They got to do something else besides monitor you. They got to be able to censor you. TEPCO's worked vigilantly to close out scrutiny, and they have too. And so you'll never find the story that I'm telling you tonight anywhere else, unfortunately, and the
Mm.
documentation in that. And so another study showing 360 radioactive sulfur per day inhaled and tends to concentrate in the testicles, which means it's going to sterilize the eggs, right? And so when you look at the birds and the insects and mammals and animals and everything else, imagine how vulnerable they are compared to us. Then that's why you're seeing this incredible decline of birds and insects and species. And by proxy, you're seeing the bigger mammals like whales and porpoises and seals and sea lions showing up emaciated everywhere. Not because there's no food left, but because they have leukemia. And so, anybody with leukemia, you know that they lose weight and they lose all their hair. And we see that with the seals and sea lions and similar stuff. Okay, so we got one more section. We'll come back over and then we'll finish next section in a few minutes, I guess. And so that's pretty good. We made it almost all the way
Yeah.
to.
Are people still awake? I mean, for all the information, not because it
I
is
know, absolutely. No,
very
no, I know.
interesting information, and I'm all ears. So
It's
I mean
difficult.
it in the
Yeah.
positive way.
Oh no,
I
100%.
say it a bit crooked, but it's meant well.
No,
And
no, 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 no. It's
again,
not. No, no, no. It's 100% true.
yeah, and
Like,
again, I had questions because you were talking about the rice that they just
I
had
do
to
this five
stop.
days a week with 17 people on my show. I've
Yeah,
been doing it for years, right?
yeah.
So I get it. It's a very difficult subject. It's very hard.
Mm,
It's very tedious. But if you're not familiar with the subject, this is your one opportunity, and you're not going to find it on the Discovery Channel. You're not going to find it anywhere
exactly.
else.
And there is,
And
fortunately, everyone can rewatch it later on. And I was thinking about to come back to these rice crops next to these bags with radioactive soil. And you were talking about that helicopters that flew over to had to measure the radiation. But I saw maps of where they had a tiny spot on the map, and it was then in Japan. And then, for example, a very tiny spot was then red, the red zone, but it was a very tiny spot, and then around it was a zone where people could enter for a few hours. And then I
yeah,
feel like, how is that possible? That
that's their
is,
official map. Where they
yeah,
what
I fit.
Monique is talking about is The no-go zones in Japan, these are big sections, and they
Yeah.
decided little tiny spots in the middle of the no-go zone, the radioactive nuclear wasteland, they were going to open it up.
Yeah.
And and so if you drive into those, if you own a house there, you're allowed to go back to your house. You're not allowed to stop. You got to drive straight to your house, get out of your car, and go in your house.
Mm-hmm.
If you go in the garden and you're kicking a ball around across the road, you can't go and retrieve it
Mm-hmm.
because it's too radioactive. And so that's murder to send somebody in that environment. You can't.
Yeah.
Radiation is airborne, right? And so
Mm.
suggesting that you can make tiny fractions of the place habitable
Mm.
is absurd. But that's what they're actually doing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
No.
absurd. I saw a documentary where people, and I find it very dangerous, people who were, for example, close to Fukushima and they were then in a house, in a former shop, and then they really pointed at a certain edge in the corner of that shop where the fallout was fallen down. And then I think you cannot even get close to that. I think like, what are they doing? That's dangerous, you know? It is, huh? I mean, if they are in a meter,
If you breathe it in, then
yeah,
it's permanently in your body.
yeah,
So
exactly.
it works this way: if you're driving past a nuclear power plant, the nuclear power plants are legally allowed to vent radiation. They're legally allowed to burn radiation. They all have incinerators at them. You open your window up and you breathe in
Mm,
radiation. You put your window back up and you drive home 2,000 miles away.
mm,
A couple of decades later, you're going to have a tumor or catastrophic illness
yeah, because a
from
lot,
that single exposure. So,
exactly.
Monica, what you're talking about is being in a nuclear wasteland, breathing it over and over and over, drinking it. You
Mm,
can't avoid it. Um, it's going to turn out bad over the next number of years, if not sooner, right?
yeah, and that's the pity. Is that's so sad as well because
Because you can't
often it's
perceive it.
shows only years later as well. Many
And
diseases.
you see the urban explorers doing it,
Mm,
and Akuma, which is 2 kilometers away from it,
mm,
there was a bunch of urban explorers that went there in 2019, and they went back this year, about 2 months ago.
mm,
And they had pictures from 2019 of the biggest hospital that was abandoned.
mm.
When they went back this year, all the equipment was gone.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
So they shipped that off to some country, sold it, and you're talking about tens of millions of dollars worth of equipment,
Mm,
right? All kinds of the theater, operating theaters, all of it was gone.
mm-hmm.
So this is all radioactive. This is all covered in radioactive dust,
Yeah.
and you can't get rid of it. So you're
It's.
having people are getting operated on with radioactive equipment.
Mm,
It's just holy smokes.
yeah.
It's heartbreaking
Yeah, it is.
that.
It's like, oh, where can we find the solution, Because it's invisible. That's the scary thing. It's man-made and it's yeah, it's invisible. But yeah, I don't want to interrupt you too much.
But you gotta deal with it. You gotta it's a very difficult. We got a very difficult problem. So if we had a meteorite coming at our planet, and we're like, holy shit, gig is up in 2 years' time. That baby's gonna smoke us. Well, the whole planet, all the universities would get busy and work together and try to come up with a solution, right?
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
wouldn't all just say, oh well, I'm not an expert in meteorites. I don't know anything about it. Have a nice day. No,
Mhm.
the universities would flip gears, and you would have 10,000 universities trying to come up with a solution. We'd probably come up with a solution. We're pretty smart.
Mhm.
But without that consensus, without that urgency, because like a meteorite, we could see it, right? But the radiation, you can't.
Mhm.
And so global warming is 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry. It's actually real. It's pulsing energy every second, gas, oil, and coal emissions. The carbon doesn't produce plumes covering the planet, pulsing energy every second for millions of years. And that
Mhm.
carbon is assimilated into insects and birds and trees and flowers and plants. And if we had no carbon, we would look just like the moon. There would be no life whatsoever.
Mhm.
And so carbon is good. All we're doing is we recycle carbon.
Mhm.
So they wanted to demonize carbon. They, I'm not sure exactly what the big plan was because they looked 50 years ahead and 100 years ahead with their plans. But generally speaking, radiation never goes away, and you add to it each day more and more of it, pulsing energy at the speed of light every second for a million years. Every day you're adding more plumes from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. We
Mhm.
have 30 years where it was legal to dump it into the oceans, and they did. And these 45-gallon drums, when you dump them over the boat, when they get down 100 feet, they implode. So you're releasing the radiation immediately into the environment. And people say you're diluting it, but in one sense you're diluting, but you can't destroy it. So you're just spreading it. And when you do so much of it, like if you get a cup of tea and every 30 seconds you put another spoonful of sugar and you mix it up, and then you have a few sips of tea, and then 30 seconds later you put another spoonful of sugar, and you do that for an hour. Well, your cup is going to overflow right away because you can't hold that much sugar, right? But after a few minutes, you can't drink it because it's too sweet to drink, right? Because you can
Yeah,
perceive
good
it, you know.
example. Yeah.
But with radiation, you can't perceive it. It's not visual. It's not going to overflow. It's not going to displace. Well, it displaces all the birds and insects and mammals and animals and everything else. But that gets blamed on this cliche of global warming. And I actually got a folder there to articulate that narrative, global warming. And I'm not sure we're going to get to it.
Yeah, because just to communicate with you, it's now 10 to 10 almost.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess we maxed out, eh? That's good.
Well, yeah, it's a good sign, isn't it? I mean, the
So
time.
now we can go for questions because I can articulate the rest of it without the documentation. We've got more than enough documentation for everybody tonight to know that, hey, we got a problem.
Yeah,
And here,
I
here it
think so.
is,
I
right?
think so too. But that's
Yeah.
why I thought communicate with you, because
Thank
what
you.
was your plan otherwise to attach? And
Now, the tanks, I'll just verbally talk the tanks right through for a minute and then we'll take questions.
Mhm.
Is that in 2013, they had 1,000 tanks. In 2014, they had 1,000 tanks. In 2015, 2016, 2017, 1,000 tanks. 2018, 2019, 2020, still 1,000 tanks. 2021, 2022, 2023, they still have 1,000 tanks. A single reactor could fill up all the tanks 6 times a day, by the way. The tanks normally need, uh, or a reactor normally takes 4,500 tons a minute, 1,000,000 gallons a minute, just to run 1,440 minutes a day. We're talking about multiple reactors. They're claiming the water they're spraying on 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperature meltdowns is 120 tons a day, 140 tons a day. 140 tons a day is a garden hose, and a garden hose split 4 ways in 4 melter reactors. So they're 100% lying about the quantity and qualities. And they can't put it in tanks. The Riva system didn't work in 2014. We got the documentation. The ALP system that they claim they're using didn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because it's several sieverts per liter, and that after 20 minutes you can never change the filter again because there's so much radiation. And that the pipes where the water is being carried would be so radioactive you can never walk over them without getting a lethal dose. Not only that, if you fill up a tank at 2 sieverts per liter of just a beta that they acknowledged, it's 1.4 million sieverts. It means you couldn't build another tank on the site. So they're being completely dishonest in every facet. But that's the cover story. Same as the pictures, Monique, that I showed earlier, as you know, where they pretend they're in a reactor building that don't exist. It's in that same ballpark.
Yeah.
So that's basically. Is there any safe way to use nuclear energy or nuclear bombs? No. All nuclear bombs are a nuclear war, and you're liberating, whether it's in anger or not, you're still liberating the radiation into the environment. Um, and everything that they've done underground, of course, split the earth open and vented into the environment too. And an interesting thing about nuclear bombs was that when they were setting off nuclear bombs back in the day, when you go look at these old studies, they noticed that for 1,800 miles circumference around wherever the nuclear test bomb was to, that the water changed its structure. So structured water, like water that runs over a mountain, over minerals and everything else, that's what our bodies are designed for. That's called structured water. But we're able to change the structure of water, And when you change the structure of water, that's not what your body is used to. So when you add electrolysis and chemicals to a water, you change that structure of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes like this. There was a study, and it was translated from a Russian documentary on water called BOA. And there was major universities. They took water from the Alps mountains, pure water, and they went to hospitals in the United States with this pure water. And they took terminally ill cancer patients, and now cancer, your blood is plated up, which is not natural. And that's why your blood doesn't work no more. And so when they took blood samples and they gave them a glass of structured water. Then they waited 20 minutes, took another blood sample, and they gave them another glass of structured water. They done that for 6 hours. And they watched the blood unplate over 6 hours in terminally ill patients by just giving them structured water. Another thing about structured water was that your plants will mature 30% quicker with 30% more foliage and 30% more fruit than it will with unstructured water that went through electrolysis or electrical pump or had chemicals added to it. And there's actually devices out there that will structure your water. You can buy that will change your water back into the natural structure.
Mm-hmm.
But another way of doing it I found along the way was that if you freeze water, because water is the only thing that exists in all three forms, liquid, solid, and gas. If you freeze the water, you'll change the structure back, the structure of water. And originally, but that's what our body's designed for. That's what plants thrive on. We got studies on that. And there was monks that were put into solitary confinement back in the 1800s and were ostracized for many years, and they were deprived of light and deprived of food. They were given stale bread and stale water, basically. And what they discovered, and this has been proven in the laboratory, was that if you took bad water and prayed to the water and like worship the water, so to speak, where you say, "Hi, water, you're looking so great today. I'm so appreciative." Just this bizarre connotations. The water changed the structure back. And if you grew rice or you put rice in unstructured water, it didn't ferment per se. It didn't do its normal thing. But in structured water, it would always, you know, it would grow plants and everything else. But in unstructured water, it wouldn't. So that's really important to your health. By the way, you're tied to wherever you were born, conceived by the water, because that's what made up the genetic. That's what your genetic makeup is consisted of, the minerals from the water, because you're mostly water.
Mm-hmm.
So we are
Exactly.
physically tied to wherever we were born. But that water is very important. So if you ever get an opportunity and don't live where you grew up to go back there, you should take advantage of it, and you should try to bring water back home with you and consume all of it, because that's the minerals that your body is actually made up of.
Mm-hmm. Very
Anyway, I
interesting. Very
digressed on it,
interesting, by the
but it's
way.
important. That's important, yeah,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
your health. That's really important for people's health. Structured water. So
Mm.
find well water, and drink that. Even if you can't get proper containers, that structured water is so good for your health.
Mm-hmm.
You really will feel the energy too by
Mm.
drinking it. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I know about it. It's a difference. It's a great difference. Yeah. Well, maybe we're
Let's keep questions. Just give it a try
shall
it
we go
again.
to the questions? Well, I didn't practice
We
it with
digressed again. Yeah.
the questions. Oh boy, I have here. Oh, I have here on my iPad all the questions. So now, shall I read them out loud? Is
Yeah,
that
I
maybe
guess
the
so.
best? I didn't did that's what I did not practice beforehand. We're also not with the great moderators and the people who collected them. And again, thank you so
So
much. And a
do
shout
the
out
best.
to
Thank you,
Barry,
everybody. Yes.
Barry
Do,
Hendelson.
do the best you can, for sure.
And wait, I will check. So also I saw things come by already. Questions. So more questions, but I guess they are all collected here in on the Jitsi. Is that true for the ones who are collecting them? So there was one. I saw a DJ Mindhacker also in the chat, by the way. So again, so I will take then only the questions. Okay.
But
I
Barry
will
says, yeah, it's up to date. Yeah.
I will grab the questions of you, DJ Mindhacker, of which I copy pasted. Did you know Fukushima only released 10% of the radiation that was released after Chernobyl? That was much bigger, but also more forgotten. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, Chernobyl was a graphite reactor. I actually explained it earlier.
Mm,
Chernobyl was equal to about 1/100th of each of Japan's reactors. Japan's reactors are pure uranium, pure plutonium, and they had decades of reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings. Chernobyl was a new reactor. These were 40 years old, and they lost all of those inventories too, and we showed that documentation earlier. And so this dwarfs Chernobyl, and Chernobyl was really bad, but I covered that lie many times over the years,
mm,
and that's just propaganda that somebody accidentally came across and sent to us.
mm,
And so it's simply not true. Chernobyl is at on a good day would be 1/1000th of Fukushima, but Fukushima is still melting down.
mm.
Oh yeah, so
Yeah.
try another question. Yeah.
Yeah, I follow the questions here. Wind scale in UK. Does that ring a bell? Wind scale in UK also had big accident that is almost forgotten in 1957.
Right, that was at Sellafield, right alongside of Crumbia, and they have huge cancer clusters in Crumbia, which is right alongside of it. And workers at Sellafield have a lot of aborted babies, apparently. It's still hemorrhaging 8 million liters a day into the Atlantic Ocean. It's still hemorrhaging airborne. It's actually surrounded by farms, as far as you can see, on three sides. The ocean's on the other side. It's contaminated that whole coastline, and Europe and the Arctic has been contaminated by Sellafield is a reprocessing facility. They
Mm,
also take fuel from other countries and reprocess it into mixed oxide fuel. It's currently closed down permanently, but remediation is expected to take 3, 4, 500 years.
all right. So see, DJ Mindhacker, is he maybe responding to that? Chernobyl is also still going on, and if there would
Kodamiko
get
Kaku, yeah.
any water in sarcophagus. I hope I
That's
say
right.
it. That's
That's right.
that's covering Chernobyl right now. It's still a risk of exploding.
Every creek holiday. If you look at the pictures of Chernobyl, what the pictures they show you, right, which is the so-called reactor curium core meltdown is solidified. When you look at that, that's just a fraction. That's maybe a ton. They allegedly lost around 50 tons. Fukushima reactors, the fuel pools were stuffed with 4 decades of reactor cores, right? And yes, Chernobyl's bad, and there's 3 million children, according to Kofi Annan. I think it was in '79 or '89. Said there was 3 million children with disabilities, and the disability from radiation is permanent. So
Mhm.
3 million children with disabilities, and there's 1,800 diseases. So it's not just cancer, and they're trying to. They claim there's only 28 people officially died at Chernobyl. Uh, they actually kidnapped around 900,000 people and shanghaied them into going into Chernobyl. So Chernobyl is really bad.
Mm,
And I'm not trying to downplay Chernobyl. Chernobyl is irrelevant compared to Fukushima, and Chernobyl is not irrelevant.
mm,
But in the same conversation as Fukushima, it's irrelevant.
I
It's
know.
actually irrelevant, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, Chernobyl was brutal. Holy smokes, that was
Mm. Yeah, many people recall the day that when it was announced. I still recall the whole atmosphere when it was announced. Many people have that, like the same with the
yeah,
Twin Towers. Like I know exactly where I was. That's one of my moments that I know exactly where I was, even with all my MK Ultra inside, but all
yeah.
the layers
Wow,
of personalities. But I know exactly the whole atmosphere. And there's one thing what I had that day. That was warm day here in Netherlands, and I felt instinctively already I stay
yeah.
inside, and then I heard it happened. So something in me
Wow, you're
warned.
lucky. You stayed inside. Holy
I stayed
crap!
inside, yeah, and I
You guys
was
got hammered. I've covered studies. I don't have them available,
yeah,
unfortunately, tonight
Netherlands as well.
on
Yeah, I
Europe.
know. Yeah.
But if, my presentations I do each year on the anniversary of Chernobyl, I covered many other times,
Yeah.
but each year on the anniversary, the last anniversary, I've done around 900 academic studies in a presentation. So we just ran through to show you how many actual facets of the ecosystem and humanity that we affected by nuclear meltdown. It's stunning. It's stunning. I have a
Exactly.
folder right now with 1,800 studies into it I've never shared. I haven't been able to get to
Mm.
of just Chernobyl. So the enormity of it is it's what it's done to Europe is just yeah,
Mm.
really something. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's keep going. Yeah,
Yeah. I didn't even see. And thanks for Barry for answering that. The questions are up to date. It's so great. I'm so grateful.
yeah,
Um,
me too.
so exactly. Um, was it possible to film? Wait. Was it possible to film after, let's say, a year? Or are drones, their battery or cameras not able in these amounts of radiation?
Yeah, electronics won't work in that environment. I'll just give me one. You can keep talking. I'm just going to cover that for 1 second because
Yeah, of course. Well,
I just got to fix that. I got a light there blinking at me.
oh no,
Okay.
that's fine. I'm
I just didn't want to be. I
well.
didn't want to have my armpits up in the glass. We're good to go. Keep
Okay.
going.
Well, I myself am also. Did you hear the question, by the way? Because I
We're
also
good
have
to
to
go.
put on
Keep
some
going.
light, or am I not too dark for the screen?
No, I just had one of my lights was blinking, and I wasn't sure if that was showing up in the
Ah,
camera.
okay. Well, I have to
Yeah.
put on a light, but this one, you just answered, I guess. Was it possible to film after, let's say, a year, or are drones, their battery or cameras not able in these amounts of radiation? You answered that, huh?
My
Or
understanding is this will fry. Every robot they tried to send into Fukushima has fried right away.
mm,
Yeah, and because you're talking about, um, I don't know, how would you look at it? I wonder. You're talking about pure energy. You know, how
mm,
can I don't know. It'd be like taking your booster cables and hooking up to your batteries and grabbing your cell phone with the other two ends. Something you wouldn't do, right? Because you know electronics is going to give up the ghost right away.
mm,
My understanding is that the students in Fukushima Prefecture are working on robots, and so the question is, how come Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Oxford, MIT, Berkeley, the major shakers and movers, haven't come up with a robot, right? A uniformed robot that they can send to a nuclear event worldwide.
mm,
Why are they trying to develop one? After 80 years, how come we haven't developed something that's just get it off the shelf for each of these individual sites? It's because it destroys electronics.
mm,
And the only one that I can think of that could work was if you had a pneumatic robot. So a robot that was ran by hydraulics or water. So if you used the camera would be in a big vat of water, and then you would have corrected lenses so you can see, right? So you would hide the camera in a big container of water, and then the mechanism that's carrying the camera would be driven by pneumatics with no electronics, and that everything is controlled by cables. And so you would set up towers with cameras that can zoom in to wherever your pneumatic robot was to, and you would drive it that way. You wouldn't necessarily, or you would have it installed inside of water, hid away, protected from the shine, the X-rays, the neutron bombardments, the beta rays, and stuff like that. Which breaks down the integrity of everything anyway. On top of that,
mm,
of the infrastructure. So you have time constraints of when we can come up with solutions
mm,
because it makes all the metal and cement brittle,
mm.
uh, and that shouldn't exist. Basically, this stuff shouldn't exist. It has
Yeah,
too many flaws.
yeah.
Have you got
Yeah,
another
you're
question?
talking about the integrity of buildings, but I, it occurred to me that the integrity even of airplanes has been
Compromise, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really
because they're
true,
flying
eh?
around the plumes. It's 100% true.
Yeah.
And we've seen examples, and this is a bad way too, by the way. And we've seen examples of nuclear releases in small communities where all the car windows were harmed.
Mm.
And so the nuclear plant, because back in the 50s and 60s, had major releases. And so the community was really upset with the nuclear plant because all the car windows in this section of the community
Mm-hmm.
were brittle and they were cracking or something. They all had damage on one morning when they woke up. So this happened overnight. And so the nuclear industry realized, and people didn't know what was actually happening, said, well, we'll pay to replace your windows. And everybody was happy with that, and everybody just went on with their lives. I can't remember the nuclear plant in particular,
Mm-hmm.
but imagine, so that whole community should have been abandoned
Yeah.
right immediately because the evidence was that you caused the damage to the windshields
Mm-hmm.
with radioactive in a community. It's
It's so bizarre, but and very sad. I mean, for
for the
planet,
harm, yeah.
for the harm for the
Because
people.
you might not
Yes.
get sick for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but you will get sick. Not maybe, not
Mm.
perhaps. Everybody will get sick from it.
It
And
is.
there's 1,800 diseases. So when you see a spike in the diseases,
Yeah.
you got to wonder what was.
And
Did
it's and
nuclear
it's
play a part to it?
yeah, and it's visible. I mean, even in Europe, in the Netherlands as well, like dementia, ALS, or Parkinson's disease has in the last couple of years. I'm not sure how big of a percentage, but only in Netherlands and Europe, it is incredible how that also increases. I feel that's all connected to that. But
Parkinson.
that's
Yeah, I
my.
actually had a hairdresser a few weeks ago.
Mm,
She was cutting my hair. She said, "I don't know if you noticed it." She said, "But me and my dad was talking. Just an absurd explosion of people with dementia and autism and Parkinson and
mm,
autism." She said, "Is it just me, or is it?" She said, "Over the last couple of years, we've just seen this explosion. It's frightening,
yeah.
and younger people too, right?
Mm, yeah.
It's frightening. We have clusters down here where people die of heart attacks in clusters, like little communities where 5 people might die in a week from heart attacks.
Mm,
It's like, oh my god!
yeah. It's
Like when I was
it's
young, you would never hear tell of it. One person would die, but not a cluster. This
mm,
is
yeah.
40-year-old, 50-year-olds walking down the road dropping dead.
Yeah, it's becoming more normal. I find that more alarming that so many things. Yeah, people are have a very hard time worldwide with coping. With being distraction is not even the right word, but by hunger, by fears, by war, and yeah, it is so sad that this is now being so put under. Yeah,
Yeah,
under the
yeah, for
glass, under the how do you say that? Enlargement glass. What's another word?
yeah, magnified,
Yeah,
magnified.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I always know that word, but yeah.
The DJ Miner hacker was saying that the pneumatics wouldn't work. Well, the reason I say pneumatics was there's no electronics. Pneumatics are in the bulldozers. All the electronics are 2,000 feet away in a separate vehicle, so that doesn't get close enough to the wreck to get affected. And that's why you have to have cameras zoomed in because you're driving it from 2,000 feet away for the pneumatics to get in there and clean it up. That was the only that came up randomly, by the way. But
Hmm.
that's my take on it anyway. So it's all good.
Yeah. Well, shall we go to the next question? Um, there are so many questions. Sunbeam Sting. She's also still in the
Yeah,
in the chat, I
I've
believe.
seen her. I've seen her do it. Yeah.
Yeah, a few questions. Question one: do GMO plants crops also take radiation in easier and therefore be affected by it more, especially in the long run?
Absolutely. The GMO is really insidious. What they're doing with GMO.
Mm.
There was research of radiation. So if you got radiation in your body, for instance, what they discovered was a certain frequency can make the radiation, the isotopes, more energetic. And so that was equated with cell phones. Your cell phone could be capable of exciting the radiation that's in your body and causing you even more harm. And so gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas, for instance, they don't mingle. So if they're all in your body mixed, when they pulse energy in your body, they'll still do that braking effect in your body. But now we're talking about how a frequency can actually excite them to do it even more. Just a frequency, and that can be implemented from 5G towers or from cell phones and we know 5G has I've actually seen it with my own two eyes where these towers are in the woods and trees around the tower don't grow anything on that side of the tree. Those sides of the tree all die.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of the tree will have like deformed new growth on it. So it's really just what the hell is that? And then I start realizing and paying attention, and then I seen it symmetrically. So frequency can excite the radiation, and in GMO food, there was a study of Mothers for America on GMO corn on the cob, and what they wanted to study was the ratio. So we know how much calcium, magnesium, carbon, iron, and everything else is in the corn on the cob. So when they done a study of GMO, what they figured out was that you had to eat 425 GMO corn on the cob to get the same amount of calcium and carbon and iron and potassium, magnesium as you would from a single organic corn on the cob. Basically, you had to fill up the back of your seat of your car with corn on the cob to get. In fact, what they said at the end of it, I thought was really funny. They said you get more nutrition licking a stamp for your mail than you do from eating corn on the cob, GMO corn on the cob. So it was there's 340,000 times more energy in organic corn on the cob than GMO corn on the cob. Not only that, they engineered in toxins and dioxins and formaldehyde into the DNA of the corn on the cob, which is not indigenous to the corn on the cob, as pesticides, so to speak. And then your body takes that and that embalming fluid. There was another one I can't remember. Really, like wow, holy goodness, you know. And this was commissioned by Mothers for America. This was a pretty innocent organization that seeks to benefit the children, right, and helping the mothers. And that's a stunning GMO. And so you can be sure it's a lot worse than that. And they can target your organs with certain GMO, right, with the chemicals that are not indigenous to the normal. Yeah, no, it's. I covered it a lot years ago, and it didn't take that much available for people, right? That's probably one of the reasons they took it down. Okay, was there anything else?
Yeah,
Keep her going.
Sunbeam Sting answers also, wow, it is even worse than I thought. But yeah, here's another question. How much does radiation affect the rain in a form that it will erode buildings, also ancient buildings, quicker? And does that rain also affect people and plants?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, by the way. And so the rain in buildings with integrity that's already compromised because they're legacy buildings. The radiation destroys the on the atomic level, so it breaks down the atoms, and so it becomes what you call brittle because of the exposures from the pulsing causes an embrittlement to all that kind of architecture is very vulnerable to any kind of radiation. When plants are sucking up the radiation, of course, the species now the plant can't exist without bacteria and fungus and certain little. Every plant has an incredible amount of enzymes and little species also that coexist with each other. They enhance each other synergistically. And so you destroy all of that and you're only left with a plant. Now the plant is not healthy and you don't want to be eating it because you're bioaccumulating radiation and so are the animals or insects that are dependent upon it. And then for flowering plants that will create radioactive pollen, and so moths and bumblebees and butterflies and stuff like that, which are pollinators, won't will bring that radioactive pollen back to their hives, for instance,
Mm.
and you'll destroy the integrity and the genetic makeup, the millions of years of genetic makeup of those hives, because we know a lot of this is generation after generation after generation. I'm currently out looking on research expeditions all week this week at for birds and that on the coastline on the ocean, and there's no excrement on the cliffs. So the cliffs are thousands of generations of birds have came to that same area and nested at the same time each year. And the last couple of years they disappeared, and it's never been explained away. But there's no excrement on the cliffs. So the cliffs, I'm used to cliffs being covered in the excrement. That's how you know where the birds nest are too, right? And now there's none. It's
Mm.
just whole. That means they didn't show up. They're dependent upon other species, keystone species, which is what we're going to be researching for the next number of months. Here, the species. We'll be doing a lot of that. Did I lose track of that? There was a third. There was a third part. There was infrastructure, buildings. There was plants, and there was something else in that question. Monique, was can you read that question one more time?
Of a sunbeam sting, you mean?
Yeah,
That is the same question.
yeah. Just read it one more time for me,
Okay,
because
yeah, of
I
course.
make
Yeah,
sure I got
sure.
it. Yeah.
How much does radiation affect the rain in a form that it will erode buildings, also ancient buildings, quicker? And does that rain also affect people and plants?
Yeah, because it's radioactive. So the middle one was people. That was the one I couldn't remember.
Ah,
So
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
we got through that one.
Yeah, well, she answers great answers. So glad I had the opportunity to ask an expert.
Yeah, you're
Voila.
certainly welcome.
Another question, also from Sunbeam Sting. Yeah, I will go them just the whole one after the other. Uranium, ammunition, or any can that also be linked to certain health issues?
Right, the what they now call it depleted uranium munitions, and it was originally called DOLRAM, depleted uranium low-level radioactive material, and it was we were able to link it during the Gulf War, and there was a physicist at a Hamburg conference from Japan that had calculated out that the 700 tons used in the Gulf War in Saddam and invaded Kuwait, and that was equal to 44,000 Hiroshima bombs worth of low-level radiation. They were shot by the A-10 Warthog, the Americans' A-10 Warthog, and that airplane only uses depleted uranium munitions. And depleted uranium munitions are actually more. It's best to describe them as dirty bombs. Each one of them is a dirty bomb. They're contaminated with the full range of radioactive isotopes. They have gone through a chain reaction, and they're pyrophoric, so they catch fire when they're going through the air, and they liberate the radiation and particulates into the environment. So they contaminate the land, the fresh water, the ecosystem at the same time. They were only supposed to be used on hardened targets, but they used them with no reserves now for quite for the last couple of decades. And in Basra, in Iraq, women are all on birth control. They won't have babies no more because over 80% of the babies that were born after the invasion were deformed. And it was it's so heartbreaking. They were severely deformed. And so there's no way to misunderstand it. And that the Pentagon tasked Dr. Doug Rourke in 1991 to clean up in after the Gulf War, and so he brought in his crew, and everybody within 3 days recovered and open sores from the depleted uranium munitions. And again, doctors in the 50s and 60s described radiation as a biological weapon because,
Mhm.
like, if you die from radiation poisoning and you get cremated, you're going to liberate the radiation back into the environment. They can float around for thousands of years looking for a victim and then find a victim and attack them and rinse and repeat for millions of cycles. So you can't destroy it by burning it or with acid or any conventional way. So it's worse than a biological weapon because you can destroy it, right?
Yeah. And by the way, now I come to a question, just a tiny question of myself. Like, um, someone said, like, yeah, you can taste nuclear. Is that true?
No, not mine. Well, in certain incidences, you could.
Like metal like. That's what I.
Yeah, if you're in a heavy fallout zone, you probably will taste it.
Mm-hmm.
You might not comprehend what's really going on,
Mm-hmm.
but I've heard you know uh, I've heard examples of that
Mm-hmm.
that are 100% true. That they did taste it, but these were severe cases, and they paid a severe price for being in that environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can taste it in
Mm-hmm.
certain incidences, but typically on the other side of the ocean, you're not going to. You might though, you never know, but you're probably not going to taste it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's you might notice something, that's for sure, but you might not be able to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, because the human senses are extraordinary, as you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're very. It's really the human species really is special in its sensories. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, so thanks. So yeah, another from well, I grab wait, Sunbeam Sting. You're very wow, great questions. I think. Okay, this is a long question. Maybe this one, if there is time left. Well, we have time left, but
Yeah.
it is a bit a weird question. Maybe there are no weird, strange questions. By
Oh,
the
that's
way,
right. There's no
could
such
there
thing as a bad question. Yeah.
mm, could there be also in the ancient past certain events have been caused by ancient historic power stations that caused, for instance, a period that people got smaller and certain species died out? And is there also evidence of power station that melted down and they just did not tell the people? Why do I say the police?
Yeah. Well, there's good examples. Was that the whole question?
That was a long question.
Okay, so no, it was the whole question.
Yeah, that
I
was
didn't know if I
all.
cut you off earlier or something. There's a nuclear power plant in the United States called Santa Susana, but this was a experimental reactor that melted down, and there's a meltdown known as 3 Mile Island. It's considered the worst one in America. But
Hmm.
Santa Susana melted down in 1959, still melting down, and in after 50 years, it was considered to release more 460 times more radiation than the 3 Mile Island nuclear meltdown released. And so that's still covered up today, for instance, right? There was the SL1 that melted down in Idaho, that was covered up. We know there was a lot of submarines that sank and was covered up. These had nuclear reactors, multiple reactors on board. And so there is a lot of incidences. But the question you were talking about kind of sounded like they were wondering, was there civilizations thousands or millions of years ago that might have had nuclear power?
Hmm.
Like the reason the Earth has the heat it has is because of uranium decay throughout the Earth, the soil of Earth, all the way down to the core. There is no like natural uranium, and that creates energy, and that's why the Earth is the heat that it actually is, pulsing energy. And there is a high grade uranium deposits on this planet that could start its own chain reaction a million years ago on its own without power plants or anything else. But just the actual uranium and a neutron source could have caused a chain reaction and criticality in nature that is such high assay uranium. And France gets all of their uranium for about 50 years from Niger because it's such high grade. But in order to get the cheap uranium, they caused a civil war in Niger for over 60 years. And they destroyed the government and the villages so that they can have access to cheap uranium, which is what they do today. It's really a despicable thing when you appreciate what the the carnage from that was. And of course, they used the nuclear bombs, they irradiated the French Polynesian islands, every single person and creature in the French Polynesian islands. And it's over 7 administrations have refused to acknowledge it in governments. So, this is the opposite of how humanity is supposed to treat each other. When we look at the nuclear industry, it's pretty blatant, right? This is a rogue organization, the nuclear industry. They're completely rogue. They're total disrespect for all species, not just humanity, right? It's really, it's blatantly obvious anyway when you look at it. Yeah.
Well,
Was
you
any
come.
other?
Well,
Go ahead.
Rogier Hop from RHTV Live is also here. Hey, welcome, Rogier. And he asks, Dana, tell me what you know about the Empress of Ireland. What does Dana know about the Empress of Ireland? He should know about this.
The Empress of Ireland. I don't know nothing off the top of my head. It doesn't ring a bell with me.
Okay.
The Empress of Ireland. Is that a ship we're talking about that sank?
Maybe he can answer that. That we will know. We learn as well. Was a ship. Empress of Ireland was a ship that sank in Canada.
No, I haven't heard of that one. I'll be looking it up after though. But I
Canadian Titanic. Well, Rogier is also a geopolitical. He knows a lot about things. What happened?
That's scary. That's a little bit scary because if I don't know about it, that scares me.
Well,
means I got to get my act together.
You ask for tough questions, so
I like it. I love it. That's how you learn. I've done that my whole life,
exactly.
Right? And so I learned my best stuff was from asking questions.
Yeah, now you maybe want to look it up. I
will too. Oh yeah, no, I'll have a folder on that before the day is out.
So Rogier, next time I will check on Dana if he knows. No, I'm kidding, but I'm like that too. So Sunbeam Sting asks another question. I think that this also explains the dead fish you see sometimes washed ashore by the hundreds. Yeah, that was the subject you want to talk about as well initially, I guess, huh? The die-offs and so on, but...
The die-offs. We covered that a bit earlier.
Yeah.
Showed pictures from recent expeditions.
Exactly.
Extensive expeditions.
Yeah, wow.
And every 2 weeks or so, I'll do a 2 or 3 hour presentation on die-offs. And that'll include all the species, as you're probably aware of yourself, Monique.
Exactly.
For those who don't know me, every 2 or 3 weeks I'll do an actual large presentation on recent die-offs worldwide that we think are associated with radiation, that we can typically associate, I should say, with radioactive foliage.
Yeah, so look him up. I will, we can maybe later on do it. I will first ask the question, then I have to put a light on because I'm very in the dark.
Yeah, I was going to say it's getting dark.
So then don't be disturbed by me moving around to get the light on.
No, it's good.
And then I will also put your website in the banner, in the stream. Yeah, I have to do a lot of things at the same time. But here comes the question, maybe from someone else. I will come back to you, Sunbeam Sting, but I try to bit diversity. Delvertje, question. So nuclear fallout tempers with all of creation. Tempers with all. You know what she meant?
Just try that one more time.
So nuclear fallout tempers, I think that she means sabotages or ruins, or have bad influence with all of the creation, so humanity and species and Earth. I think she means that.
Can you read it one more time?
It's okay.
I just want.
Yeah.
I was when you said it both times, something it just didn't register for me. Try it one more time.
Question. So nuclear fallout tempers with all of creation.
Yes. Everything with carbon is assimilating radiation into it, which is the so-called super life of life. So radiation is when like the pictures I showed you earlier of the fallout was showing the whole planet covered in radiation, which means you have whole body X-rays on top of everything else going on for all insects, all birds and bushes and trees and all ground species. Um, is being getting full body X-rays. And so, yes, what you're saying, this is symmetrically all species worldwide
Mm,
are being assaulted and injured and attacked and exterminated.
yeah,
We're actually in an extermination. That's what radiation is, an extermination machine.
yeah, and
It's
that
an
is,
extinction level event.
I
I
think
showed
this,
you the pictures earlier, right? This is an
yeah,
extinction event.
and I
Yeah,
think this is what is maybe why people don't believe it, or it's not that people have to believe it,
absolutely.
but
No, no,
I
no,
think
absolutely.
it's
Yeah,
that there is something wrong with the world and with radiation. For me, that's no doubt. But I've seen other things, but that is from my own MK Ultra experience. But I'm not want to go too deeply in
yeah.
that. But I
Well,
know
it's the same thing.
it is extremely dangerous. I have seen
Yeah.
experiments from a close. I saw pigs being totally, yeah, how do you say, they cooked by, yeah, it was awful what I've seen.
Yeah, just terrible.
And
There's a section of humanity that the inbreeding of the inbreeding of the inbreeds, and they're disconnected. They have no idea what the human experience is. Right there is, and they are put in positions a lot of times of power and authority, and they covet institutions, and they get into key positions. It's not an accident. Which
mm,
serial killer would you rather have? The one with the knife or the one with a stroke of a pen will
mm,
destroy a whole country, right?
mm,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead, Monique.
yeah. And then I still have to put on the light, but I'm so listening and so in the concentration. But it's
Yeah, it's all
fine.
good.
It's fine. Okay, Leander Bartsch. If the water, I have to translate from Dutch. If the water is without the minerals, so no life, so the water is no longer alive, a living, and you know what I mean, life
Yeah,
energized.
I do. Yeah.
Uh, does that change your DNA in the coming time, in the coming?
Yes. Yeah, big time.
And I will put on the light.
Because that's where you're getting. That's where you're getting all your minerals from, right? Is water. You're supposed to anyway. You get not all of them, but a majority of them. Like when you drink water, I would with your meals and stuff like that. That helps break down your meals, right? To make the enzymes to break down your meals. And so when you like water contains a lot of natural stuff, a lot of natural creatures. If you take water, like healthy water, put it under a microscope, you're going to see just millions of creatures. It's not just going to be the sterile water. Water comes with all these creatures. Your body takes advantage of all these microscopic creatures. That's what we're genetically predisposition is for, right? Is same as the forest can't survive without bacteria and fungus. You can't have an ecosystem without bacteria and fungus. It won't last. Roots can't grow without bacteria and fungus, right? And there's been postulating that the fungus is the only reason we exist because fungus uses us as a heat source, right? We're regulate our temperatures, which is perfect for fungus, right? And like mushrooms, the spores from mushrooms is estimated came from space. And you know how prolific mushrooms are on this planet, right?
Mhm.
Mushrooms, by the way, are very bad stuff to eat because they bioaccumulate radiation more than most things combined. And they use some places will use mushrooms to aggregate radiation to help clean up, mitigate a contaminated environment. And hemp could be doing the same thing, of course. Uh, and so, like all vegetables have that. ability to suck up radiation. And Japan uses it and then burns it in incinerators and liberates it back into the environment. And these are a riddle I can't really wrap my mind around. They're, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags of radiation in 3% of the land in Japan's close to the reactors. 30 million one-ton bags. If you took a one-ton bag, put it in the back of a one-ton pickup truck, 2,200 kilogram or 1,000 kilogram pickup truck, and put them bumper to bumper, that's 5 rows of traffic wrapped around the entire planet of one-ton bags, of 1,000 kilogram bags. These bags were only meant to last a couple of years on top of that. And now what they're doing is they got 14 million of these one-ton bags. They brought them back into the nuclear wasteland area right by the nuclear power plant. They're cutting them open and growing food in them in a no-go zone, a radioactive no-go zone. So the industry is belligerent in every facet of its life lately, I noticed. We're nothing but contempt. And I could never predict a lot of this pre-Fukushima, that if we had a major nuclear accident, this could happen and that could happen. I could never predicted that. We won't see it anywhere else on the planet. But Japan seems to have this absurd contempt for all species. This I don't know how to describe it. It's only the word contempt, really, right? It's really blatant contempt. It's disrespect. So I obviously I don't know what the big picture is when it comes to why they're willing to do what they're doing, but they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
And it's a
Yeah.
threat to humanity.
Yeah, and by the way, Sunbeam Sting says, yeah, I think he answered all my questions. And if there are more questions specifically about the subject, that would be great. I see come by other questions, but yeah, that's not about what we're talking about now.
The Empress of Ireland was a British-built ocean liner that sank near the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, which is not very far from me. But I haven't read the whole story. But I got the page open. I'll read about it later. And that was in 1914. So they wouldn't have been transporting uranium or plutonium or stuff like that back then. Could have been radium, I suppose. But like when you look back through the history of, they used to use a radioactive radium for suppositories. They were using radium for lipstick, radium for makeup for children and girls. And this would burn them permanently, give them vicious tumors and everything else. They were using radium jugs. Now, they knew this when they created this stuff. The academic community actually knew this. They had these radioactive jugs where they wanted you to pour water into jugs, let it sit for a while, and drink that radioactive water. And eventually your jaw would literally disintegrate and you would die the most horrific death possible. And there's so many examples of this where they use, and they try to make this a common. They had radium soap and radium toothpaste, and anybody that utilized that would have died from using that.
Yeah,
And
like
that's. Go ahead.
yeah, like the
Girls.
radium girls, and you see there the jaw totally being. You see that
That show, Radium Girls, that was pretty accurate. That's probably the only one out there I can tell you. If you wanted to see some of the legacy and actually, pretty accurate, watch Radium Girls.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Everybody should watch that. Absolutely, everybody should watch that.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I have a hard time watching it, And I've watched it a couple times.
And a lot of
when
times,
I see the kids licking, I have to take a break because I understand, right, how sick they're going to get. When I see it, I was like, oh, wow. Like I couldn't watch the whole show in a single sitting, and I have to watch it 2 or 3 different days to watch the whole show. Freaked me out when I watched it. How cruel, to do that to people and children on top of that. And then smear them, which is what they actually done. And it was Madame Curie, who came in and volunteered to testify in their favor. She had lost both of her hands to radium
Yeah.
eventually. She won 2 Nobel Prizes, but she couldn't pick them up because she lost both of her hands.
And
Her
that's been,
laboratory is still too
yeah.
radioactive all these 100 years later to
Mm,
stay inside for more than a few moments.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, let's let me see. I think I went through all questions here. What I have here on the Jitsi, and yeah, you can see the chat as well. Is there? You can scroll as
I
well.
can, yeah, yeah.
So if you see maybe something interesting on which you like to respond, because it is
Sure. Radium and paint. I got a question here. Which bomb was more dangerous, Hiroshima or Nagasaki? Well, the Hiroshima was a uranium bomb. It was the only uranium bomb we actually ever used. Everything else was a plutonium bomb. So Nagasaki would be the answer. Nagasaki was actually worse because they used plutonium. They were both terrible, but the radioactive fallout was the only difference. They were both like the same capacity, around 15 kilotons. But if you want to think about what the Soviet Union done for a second, the Soviet Union, one of their just a single bomb. Now, if you go look up how many nuclear bombs were used worldwide, it's around 2,200. If you look at the Soviet Union's biggest bomb, the Bomba, it was equal to 3,800 Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time. So that's the equivalent of a nuclear war. A bomb is not a H, and hydrogen is not nuclear. No, what they do is they add tritium to the, tritium 3H, not the natural tritium, but anthropogenic man-made tritium 3H, which is what they claim Fukushima is going to be releasing. Uh, the tritium can make the typical nuclear weapon. That's how they got 3,800 times the Nagasaki bomb in power, was by using tritium, also known in some cases as hydrogen, right? And so tritium, they're supposed to be harmless, is not harmless at all. Is capable of producing massive explosions when utilized with uranium plutonium triggers. Yeah, there's babies being born in Fallujah and Basra. That's right. And well, like that whole country, and when the Americans went down there under the false flag of 911, they used they fired 5.5 million rounds a month for 9 years to get 10,000 Taliban. So millions dead, millions missing, millions in refugee camps, millions unaccounted for, millions of orphans. They got rid of the pensions and the patents of the country. Think about that statement. And you know who was allowed to grow food there? They weren't allowed to grow their own seeds for 2 decades in Iraq and Afghanistan. Monsanto GMO was the only crops allowed to grow for the first 2 decades after Iraq and Afghanistan slaughter. It's quite the statement, isn't it? So there's a joke out there that Monsanto won the war in Iraq and Afghanistan because they're the only ones allowed to grow crops. How evil is that, really? Right, really.
yeah. Well, it's a crooked world.
And keep going. I got any more to get through?
I see no longer more questions. They were all collected. I saw some in the chat things come by, but they were not real questions. But maybe, I mean, we are more than now
Has Dana,
exactly three
has Dana
hours.
ever seen Bigfoot?
Yeah.
No, I haven't. No. Uh, has
Uh,
Dana ever seen? Does Dana know about the powwow? I got no idea what that got to do with nuclear, but no,
yeah.
I'm not off the top of my head.
So I think we're done with the questions.
Someone ghosting me. Uh, Thank you anyway, folks. I appreciate it. You're always going to get a few people in the comment who are going to torment me a bit, but the best thing now about me is because I talk about nuclear, right? it's such a complicated subject. It's an educational program. I can't educate the population by talking about stuff I don't know 100% about, so I don't. So when I talk about something, it's only because I can provide the documentations for my assertions. Otherwise, what's the point of talking about it and trying to educate the population? Because it doesn't mean nothing if I can't provide documentations for my assertions, right?
Yeah, and look up also Rogier. Visit his website. There you see so incredible lot documentation and
Yeah.
photos and material. And Dana did and still does expeditions. So you see there actually that he is on the spot. So it's not just talking about. It's you're real. You were
I'm a
there.
busy I'm a busy person. I've been at it
Yeah.
for a long time, and
And how can you manage?
I'm prolific, right? It's
Yeah.
prolific. The amount of material that I produce on top of that.
Yeah.
This again, right? We need an archive. We need it to be honest, right? And so I'm not
Hmm.
going to depend on anybody else. I learned to forget about it. Just make sure you provide it so that the world has at least one source that is unassailable.
Hmm.
And so long as we got that out there, those that migrate to my material can find the answers, right? Because you can, and my site says welcome. You can finally stop searching and start learning because I recognize there's nowhere else to go, and that's brutal, right? It's heartbreaking, really.
Hmm.
The idea was to create a million little bastards just like me. That's how I put it over the years. Excuse the French Canadian. But to create a million little Danas, so to speak, that were articulated, weren't going to be hoodwinked. And that was the idea of this. And I got a hate on for nuclear because of what it's done over the years. And the
Hmm.
way that they attacked me and aggressively pursued me was, well, if you want, if I like playing rough sometimes too with these people, right?
Hmm.
And they like to play rough. That's perfect with me because, like, my idea of roughness is to be honest, right?
Hmm.
They can't stand up to honesty, and they created me. I would have been gone probably 5 years ago if the nuclear industry didn't just attack me relentlessly
Hmm.
and insult me. I've actually had multiple gag orders from the Canadian government against me. But the longest you can give me a gag order is 3.5 years. And they gave me gag orders just to protect their assets. But they can only protect them for 3.5 years. And the judge, and then I immediately go see another judge and get a lot of the restrictions lifted,
Is that
and which
now gone?
they always do.
Are you still being how you say that? Being officially that gag? What you
Well,
call?
they give you the gag orders they give you is only on certain people and certain institutions and certain stuff like that. They're basically trying to protect their assets. Currently, I don't have any gag orders, no. But I'm not going to be surprised when the next one comes along after the
Hmm.
experience I've had. That's part of the territory, right? You gotta like another way to look at it. Do you know a really famous activist that is famous naturally? The way you got known over the years was you had to go out and protest in the streets, and hopefully you got arrested. And then the media reported and said so and so was arrested protesting, and that's how the world learned about you. That's
Hmm.
how you got your up and comings was you went out and protested and got arrested. And so the typical activists worked their weight in salt, would have got arrested multiple times.
Yeah.
Sister Sister Royce, I think she got arrested like 70 times. She spent years and years and years in jail, and her specialty was nuclear weapons. But she didn't care if she got arrested. Didn't right? She if she's going to protest, she's going to
Mm,
protest, and getting
mm,
arrested
yeah.
is part of it. Well, let's get arrested.
Mm,
She's dead now, right? But she was really eloquent, right?
yeah. There was
Her
another.
dissent.
I recall another. I loved her. She did lectures. What's her name? She was a woman and she talked about radiation and also damaging airplanes and so on. But specifically the radiation.
Radchick.
Um,
That's Radchick. Lorraine Moret and
yeah, Lauren
Radchick,
Moret.
right?
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah,
How is she doing? Or did
I haven't
she
heard from her
also?
for the last couple of years. I've
Oh,
talked to her a bit over the years on the phone,
okay.
and I've watched a lot of her presentation. I promoted her for years
Yeah.
when no one knew her. She was out doing presentations before
Mm,
Fukushima,
yeah.
certainly, and she done a lot of presentations on depleted uranium munitions and stuff like that.
Mm,
And I used to promote her for years before Fukushima, and I'm not going to say how I done it, but let's put it this way: I made sure the world knew what her name was.
well,
I got
yeah.
I got banned by a lot of countries. China
Oh
wouldn't even
God.
let me on their websites.
Uh,
Whenever I started a website up in China, they would close it down the next day.
wow.
But
But
at one
she's
point,
doing well. She's doing well, or she's still
I don't
continuing.
know. I
Oh,
don't
you
know.
don't know, because I
I actually
found
don't
it
know.
a bit alarming, like she
I
dis.
hope
But
so.
I
Yeah,
loved her talks. So yeah.
she's something else, man. She was tortured though. They tortured her.
Oh, it
They
was.
crucified that girl.
Yeah.
That changes a person. Most people.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. I got a real thick skin, and I
Mm,
just double down.
mm,
So the more they attack me, the more of resolve I have. Oh, so you guys are think you're going to drive me away? Good luck. You
uh,
just made sure I'm never going away. In one case, once they started giving me gag orders, I decided I'll never go away.
mm,
I wasn't anyway. Right? I've been at this a decade before Fukushima happened, but with all the attacks they done on me, they created this little monster right here, and
mm,
I'm bringing it to them all the time. I do 5 presentations a week, like this tonight, right? And it was, as you know, right, when I'm in the studio with all the equipment, and I can bring anything on the screen because I have it gathered up over the years.
mm.
It's a pretty powerful weapon.
Yeah, it is.
Like right here on this, I had the preamble stuff all put together, but it still doesn't do it justice for the studio equipment that I got, where I can bring in anything on the drop of a hat. That's a
Mm,
very powerful. It's a very powerful thing, right?
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't rush it. Same as the night where I don't know how to rush things.
Mm,
It's just, here's the story, and we'll go through it, and then what's next, right? And it's, I'm just concerned that there's nobody else out there, right? And so I'm super thrilled that you got me on the show again tonight, and that gives us another chance to educate another population
yeah.
on this topic. At least get them interested. At least get them their brains to think. And I would imagine everybody tonight that was paying attention is sincere. Got a real earful. Like this stuff, truth resonates, as you know, right? The
Mm.
truth will resonate. You know the truth when you hear it, and
Yeah, feeling. I think that is what, fortunately, a lot of people are reconnecting, and I feel coming.
yeah,
I feel coming month can become pretty tough, but also that there's a chance that, yeah, I feel a lot is being disturbed in feeling.
yeah,
What I will never forget when I saw that one lonely starfish on a rock when you did during your expeditions, and I was crying, and that's
I
feeling.
was too. Yeah,
That is feeling, and I've in my MK Ultra I met
yeah,
came
it was
across a lot with
horrible.
nuclear energy, and also not only on this earth but also off planet, but that's not for now. But I know that even from outside earth, that there are beings incredible worried about humanity dealing with this nuclear energy, and I just know that. So that's part of, yeah, that's maybe too far off for you, but I know
Yeah,
a
no, I hear
lot.
you.
I know a lot of things which I don't dare to talk about, but
No, when you
it's,
when you look at the solar system, it boggles the mind how many planets and solar systems and everything else we have, right? It's
mm,
pretty arrogant for those who think that we exist on our own, right?
exactly.
I don't really go there. I'm consumed by the education in nuclear. I stick to that. I
Mm,
have 20 years ago, like everybody else, I went out and explored, what's really going on this planet, what's the key
mm,
issues on the planet, and stuff like that.
mm,
Wow, what a cluster of problems we got, right?
ugh,
And you go as far back as you can go, it's disturbing,
Yeah.
right?
What is
What they done to Vietnam is disturbing. 9 years of Agent Orange, and people say chemtrailing don't exist, but I mean, how do you explain away 9 years of Agent Orange being, flown over? They defoliaged the entire country, killed almost all the insects, and polluted the entire coastlines. There's over 3 million children with incredible debilitating deformities from the Agent Orange, which was made by Monsanto, by the way. For those who are not aware, Monsanto
Monsanto?
has
Another
never
evil
had.
place.
Yeah, they don't have a single good story about Monsanto and
Mm.
GMO
Oh,
because they were connected to that. So how are we doing? Did we find our way through this? By the looks of it.
yes. I think we're heading. I think we're heading for. I also feel my energy a bit drop, so I think we're heading for a closure. But I see a few
Six
comments
thirty.
of people that they also some are going to rewatch them tomorrow. Delvertje says thanks a lot for sharing
Yeah,
your
you're
knowledge,
welcome.
Dana.
Thank you.
And Tineke Jessie says also thanks. And Barry
You're
says the
welcome.
mainstream media also makes a lot of damage.
They
Reach
do,
and
yeah.
attention is a big
I agree.
value for knowledge uh, spreading. Oh, for knowledge spreading. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, how can we come to a closure that is also a positive message? Dana, do you
The
have some
positive message
final?
is that you know you have to have this in the equation of protecting yourself and your loved ones and your pets and your communities. You have to have this conversation in that equation, and that we have damaged the nuclear industry by being honest, right? And the more we do this, the more damage. Every time you do this, you're causing severe damage to the nuclear industry. In the nuclear industry, there is no nuclear renaissance, and that's only because we have these conversations, and that the population is not. It's a different, right? We're not the older population that we have the World Wide Web, and the information is their downfall, and they're falling apart. But they have damaged the ecosystem, they damaged the species, and everything else. But I think it's hard to come up with something positive outside
Yeah,
of
I get that.
if you're having a conversation and you're doing what you're doing, I'm doing what I'm doing. That's 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 how you win, right? If we don't
Yeah,
do it, then
yeah,
there's no one to fill
connect.
in that gap. We're in real trouble,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I believe in connecting with the. Let's cross our small differences because that makes us unique
Yeah,
as humanity and connect because I'm so craving for that there will really be a unity, that we're as unity as people stand up
100%.
all at once. Just
Yeah.
I mean there's not even needed a lot of percentages to change the world, but if there is a certain percentage, come on, let us all unite, and then yeah, we can do that. I truly believe that. So
Well, like I want everybody to remember this one important thing before I let you all go is don't eat anything from Japan. Period.
oh, that still is entering, that's
You
oh.
can't eat the food from Japan
Mm,
because the whole country is brutally radioactive. The rest of the planet is too, but
mm,
ground zero, which is Japan, is brutally radioactive,
mm.
and you need to avoid that food. And that's sad, right?
Oh,
But
it's so
it's
sad.
true.
it it,
Yes,
it is.
that's a way forward. Is
Yeah, because I've really tears in my eyes because I know,
Yeah,
for
it's
example, that
heartbreaking.
these people originally they have also a beautiful pattern of eating, like with seaweed and nori and
It's a
rice,
wonderful culture.
and
Yeah,
it
it's
is I
amazing.
love these people as well, and well,
Yeah,
actually
it is.
every culture if they're respectful. But I have
That's right. Yeah.
my heart goes out to the people of Japan, and that the idea of, I mean, let's say only alone Tokyo alone, that is being contaminated, and something in me is
36 million
still
people.
not,
Yeah.
yes, there's still not grasping that, like, these people live there, and everyone
Living in
enjoys it.
denial. That's right, yeah.
So it is,
Oh,
but
I got
yeah.
off the west coast because that's a bad spot for radio. It's the radioactive fall. It does the first landfall,
Uh-huh.
and then everything that hits the the west side of the mountains washes back down to the Atlantic or the Pacific coastline. So that's a terrible spot to live, unfortunately. And after the
Mm.
research, we've seen the extinction level event playing out. So it's prudent to get off there before cause too much harm, right? But I did get harmed. I should have got out of there within a couple of years. I waited too long, and
Mm.
because we kept doing the research expeditions.
Mm.
But look up structured water. Try finding structured water, and um, and eat organic if you can. It's very difficult to find it for a lot of countries.
Mm.
Eat organic because it's absurd amount of energy and nutrition and all the micro macro nutrients that your body needs. And just respect each other and try to find a way to throw a wrench in the nuclear industry. The whole world needs to come together and fight this industry because
Mm.
that's the biggest threat that humanity has ever faced and is now jeopardized the future of humanity.
Mm.
Okay, yeah, Monique. Bless you, honey. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. And
Me
I like your
too.
questions. It was a lot of fun. And we can do it again if you think it's appropriate. Find another time. We'll
I
get
wish.
together.
Yeah, let's do. Well, that will be then number 3, and we will
Yeah,
keep
it's good stuff.
contact. And
Well, it's good stuff, right? You got an audience, and
yeah,
they're not aware, and so you're helping them
yeah. Well, I
big
hope
time.
you enjoyed it too.
Oh,
That's
100%. Yeah, no, this is great.
yeah. And then
This is great.
Barry also says thanks for all knowledge, Dana,
Yeah,
and
thank you, Barry. You're
thank
welcome.
you as well, Barry, for yeah. That counts for. I couldn't check if all the other moderators were present, but I thank you so much. And yeah, it is. I will then
Yeah,
say to everyone, well, I should maybe go for a raid, but I think I will skip that one for now. And everyone says also thank you. Hope to see you soon again, Dana.
yes,
Yvonne
thank you.
Groot, thanks Monique and Dana. Well,
Yeah,
everyone. So,
you're
yeah,
welcome, folks.
it is
Appreciate you coming by and listening and hearing us out.
exactly. And
And
so,
we covered a lot of great topics too, right? And we covered a lot of great questions. And so
yes,
we'll
we
see
did.
everybody on the next show. Am I staying chatting to you
Yeah,
after for a few
stay a
minutes?
bit for a few minutes, and I will then put you
Yeah,
um, off the visual, and then I say goodbye to
yeah,
everyone. But
yeah,
you're
yeah.
staying
Go ahead
in
and do that.
restream, all right?
Yeah, go ahead and
Okay,
do that.
all right.
Thank you. Okay.
So, dear everyone, thanks for being here. For yeah, also Dana again, thank you so much, and everyone. Wish you a wonderful night, a wonderful continuation of the weekend, and yeah, share, like, subscribe, specifically also to Dana Durnford on his YouTube. He's live streaming, and visit his website, and of course also Barry Henderson. Thank you so much, and everyone. Did you already do a shout out as well, Barry, for you, for yourself? For your for your bio.link. I'm tired, I notice. But it was worth it, and it was great having you here. And again, yes, you did. Okay, well, everyone, again, I'm grateful for that you were here. And it is a tough subject like nuclear energy. I'm very much aware of that. And yeah, I'm just fulfilled, and I will go. Take it with me, all the knowledge again. And thank you so much, everyone, again. And see you next time. Yes, all right. Bye bye, everyone. Bye.